Venerable Sirs, friends in the Dharma, Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the perfectly self-enlightened One. Today, we gather to continue our exploration of the Four Noble Truths, a cornerstone of the Buddha's teachings. Our focus for this session is the third noble truth, the truth of cessation. In Pali, the ancient language of the scriptures, this is known as Nirodha Sacca. Now, when we hear this term, cessation, a common misunderstanding can arise. We might think of cessation as an active verb, implying an action of destroying or annihilating, perhaps in the way we might speak of actively destroying evil or eradicating wickedness. But here, in the context of the third noble truth, cessation is not an action we perform in that aggressive sense. Rather, it is a noun. It refers to a state, the state of ultimate peace. This difference between the active sense of stopping something and this state of being, which is the result of a path, can sometimes lead to confusion. Indeed, this is one of the challenges when we study the sacred scriptures. The Buddha's words delivered several thousand years ago are profoundly precious. Yet, because of the passage of time and the evolution of language, when we read these ancient texts today, it's easy for us to misunderstand or not fully grasp the depth of the Buddha's intended meaning. So, concerning this truth of cessation, if someone hasn't had the benefit of fundamental monastic training, or if a lay practitioner hasn't systematically studied the Buddhist texts, they too might easily misinterpret its meaning upon hearing the term. Often, guidance comes from venerable teachers who have carefully explained this concept of cessation. As I mentioned, it's not like actively eliminating injustice. Instead, this cessation actually points to a profound state of happiness, the complete and final end of all suffering. So, we can understand it through these two aspects. It is a state of true happiness, and it is the ultimate cessation of suffering. This state is also known as Nibbana or Nirvana. It is often said, and rightly so, that this truth of cessation, this ultimate reality of Nibbana, is actually beyond full description by ordinary language. Words are limited. Today, as we discuss it, we will also have to approach it somewhat indirectly because the ultimate state of cessation that the Buddha pointed to truly transcends our conventional words and concepts. Nevertheless, let us try to explore it together a little. The term cessation, as the Buddha used it, signifies a state where suffering has completely and utterly ceased. When you hear this word cessation, you might not immediately grasp the immensity of what the Dharma, the Buddha's teaching, is pointing to. Why is that? It is because this truth of cessation, this Nibbana where suffering ends, is a state for which one must be willing to let go of attachment to all worldly pleasures in order to find it. So, sometimes when we hear about it, it doesn't sound entirely clear or appealing. This is one reason why, at times, the Buddha's path may not seem immediately attractive to everyone. Some other religious traditions might present their ultimate goals with vivid imagery, illustrations, and eloquent descriptions that are easy to understand and which can evoke a sense of excitement. For example, they might speak of going to a heavenly realm where there are jade palaces, divine beings, beautiful winged angels, and endless bliss and happiness. We can easily picture that, and it naturally becomes appealing. But here, when we speak of a place where there is no more suffering, or the end of suffering, it can sound rather abstract, and we might not fully grasp it. Consequently, we may not see the profound and magnificent goal of the Buddha's teaching. Let me offer an analogy. Imagine there are some wealthy people. If you ask one of them, "How is your business doing these days?" they might humbly reply, "Well, I'm not unemployed." This is an understatement, isn't it? In reality, they might be incredibly busy, earning a great deal of money. Or if you ask, "Are you doing well?" they might say, "Oh, I'm not poor these days." But the truth is, they have plenty of money for everything they need. Saying not poor is accurate, but it's a very modest way of speaking. They wouldn't typically say, "I'm fabulously wealthy," as that might sound boastful. So, they use a gentler phrase like, "I'm not poor," but the underlying meaning is significantly greater. The Buddha's description of the truth of cessation is somewhat similar. When the Buddha said that if one practices correctly according to the Noble Eightfold Path, one will reach a state where there is no more suffering, we might hear that and think it's merely an absence, perhaps even a dull state. We don't realize that this place where there is no more suffering, as the Buddha described it, this Nibbana, is a state of unimaginable happiness and overflowing and inconceivable bliss. This is because the Buddha, in his great wisdom, used very modest language. He didn't elaborate excessively for several reasons. Firstly, the state of Nibbana, this ultimate cessation, is truly indescribable with conventional language. Secondly, to speak too much about it could sound like boasting. And thirdly, if one were to describe Nibbana in great detail, people might simply try to imitate those descriptions, repeating them and then falsely claiming attainment. There have been people in the past who, without reaching that state, still tried to describe Nibbana based on what they heard, making it sound as if they had truly realized it. This can lead to a great loss of spiritual merit and mislead others. Therefore, the Buddha spoke gently. This is the place where there is no more suffering. It sounds simple, but only the noble ones, the saints who have truly practiced the path and reached this state, can fully comprehend what no more suffering truly entails. For us, just hearing these words, it's difficult to fully imagine. So today, teachers everywhere, when explaining the Four Noble Truths, must be very skillful in describing this truth of cessation. They must be skillful in a way that preserves the Buddha's original intent while also elaborating just enough so that people can begin to understand. To say the complete cessation of suffering or reaching a state of absolute, perfect happiness, these phrases point to the same meaning, Nibbana. But if we just say complete cessation, it's hard to visualize. Therefore, we will approach this step by step gradually. We will talk about the progressive stages of attaining peace, happiness, liberation, and enlightenment, what we might call realizing the path or attaining the fruits of sainthood. We need to understand the cause of suffering, and then we pause, we reflect on our ideal, so that each of us can strive in our practice and re-examine the value of this truth of cessation, this spiritual peak that the Buddha has pointed out to us. Then we will not be disappointed. As we've discussed before, if we allow the law of impermanence to slowly erode the essence of the Buddha's teachings, then indeed, in the future, the Dharma might become just an empty shell, devoid of its valuable content. However, as disciples of the Buddha, we will not be complacent. We will strive with all our might to preserve the true value of the Dharma. Perhaps right now, we are still unskilled, still lacking, still making mistakes, but our reverence for the Buddha must be absolute. Our aspiration towards the truth of cessation, towards the absolute Nibbana of the Buddha, must also be boundless and unceasing. Let us resolve this together. Why? So that we can uphold the state of realization that the Buddha attained and laid out, so that the Buddha's teaching may endure for a long time, so that it is not swept away by the winds of time, reducing the Dharma to a mere shell without its core. Let us promise each other to try our best. Within this truth of cessation, it is said there are many stages. Of course, the ultimate peak of cessation is absolute Nibbana, the Nibbana that the Buddha himself and the Arahants, the fully enlightened saints, have realized. That state is exceedingly profound, and we will talk more about it later. For now, we haven't reached it. However, every step we take on the path of practice is a step where suffering gradually diminishes, and we draw nearer to peace and happiness. That is the truth of cessation manifesting itself little by little. Imagine, for example, that behind us is darkness and far ahead, beyond the horizon, is the bright sunshine. We begin our journey from the darkness towards the sunlight. With every step we take, we leave more of the darkness behind us, gradually moving towards the light. Each step is like that, a gradual movement towards peace and happiness, away from the darkness of suffering. If we reflect on this in our daily lives, we can see this clearly. For instance, perhaps just the day before, when dealing with a family issue with our siblings, we might have become angry, argued, or felt resentful. But that afternoon, we heard a good Dharma talk, and suddenly, there was a kind of awakening, a joy that arose in the mind, even though we hadn't practiced much. Just hearing the Dharma talk stirred our soul. We felt an inclination, an orientation towards the good. Perhaps that morning, we didn't have that inclination towards the good. But in the afternoon, after hearing the Dharma, that positive intention arose. Just that much, not a lot of practice yet. Then, the next day, we meet the same sibling with whom we had the conflict, and the same issue arises again. But this time, we are gentler. We don't get angry. Isn't that so? That means we have taken a step, haven't we? A step towards the light. That is a little bit of happiness already attained. Yesterday, with the same problem and the same person, we might have become agitated, angry, and sad. But today, without much extensive practice, Just by having that initial aspiration towards the good and perhaps not even clearly knowing what the good fully entails, just having heard a little Dharma suddenly the next day, we've become a little gentler. Then we start to contemplate this, to nurture this quality within ourselves. We continue to think, today I was able to be patient for a little while. We reflect further on the teachings. What is wholesome? What is unwholesome? What is right? What is wrong? What actions lead to merit? What actions lead to demerit? As we reflect more and more, the Dharma within us grows a little stronger. It advances a bit more. Then, a week later, we listen to another Dharma talk or read another book. Normally, we might be someone who just lives according to our own desires, doing whatever we please. But after that week, suddenly, we no longer feel the same compulsion to live only according to our own wishes. It's as if our heart, which was previously like a stone, has softened a little. For example, instead of stubbornly insisting on our own way, say, we wanted to go on a trip to a particular beach while someone else wanted to go to a different one, and we were adamant about our choice. Today, our heart softens and we think, oh well, the other beach is fine too. Anywhere has a blue sky, white clouds, and the sound of the waves. Anywhere is fine. Our heart has become pliable. Yet, just a week before, we would have rigidly clung to our own idea. So here we see that when the mind, the guiding mind, is nourished and developed, virtue naturally progresses, and happiness and peace come to us gradually. When our mind softens just a little, we naturally feel happier. Previously, when we were insistent on our own way, we might have thought that getting others to follow our will was satisfying, something to be proud of. But after understanding the Dharma, we realize that trying to impose our will on others is not skillful. Instead, it is the very softening of our heart, allowing us to accommodate others, our family, our friends. That brings a genuine, subtle joy. That happiness is found in this gentle pleasure when our inner self softens, allowing us to yield to another's wish instead of stubbornly insisting on our own. Isn't that right? This inner mind, if we continue to nurture it for, say, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. Previously, when encountering a difficult situation, we might have blamed everyone else. We'd say, it's because he was aggressive or she was fierce or they were unreasonable. And in the end, only we were the innocent angel. But after 3 months of nurturing the Dharma in this way, when the same situation occurs, something surprising happens. We no longer focus on others' faults. Instead, we look at ourselves and we see our own contribution to the problem. We might realize, at that moment, my words were a bit harsh. Or, my attitude then wasn't very gentle, I was quite sharp. We see our own mistakes. And when we see our own faults, we know how to regret, how to stop, and we no longer blame those around us. And when we stop blaming those around us, what happens? Suddenly, the people around us also seem to blame us less. They find us more agreeable, more lovable. This is cause and effect in life. When we are focused on blaming the world tends to blame us. But when we focus on our own faults, the world tends to be on our side. It's remarkable, isn't it? Remember, if we internally think, I am so foolish, so naive, and we blame ourselves for our foolishness and mistakes, then paradoxically, when something goes wrong, others outside us might look upon us with more compassion. They might say, oh, she is so innocent and kind. Whereas, if a problem occurs and we sit there seething, silently blaming everyone else, even if we don't say a word, people will sense it. They might look at us and think, she goes to the temple, but she seems like a demon. Even if we are outwardly beautiful, they might see something harsh in our face. But if we sit there, genuinely reflecting on our own shortcomings, others will look at us and see an angel. So, this ability to reflect on our own part, to be yielding, to be patient, these small moral qualities appearing in our mind naturally bring a kind of joy with them. It's a guaranteed joy which is quite remarkable. This makes us feel very confident that we are on the right path. When morality manifests in us, there are 2 signs. 1, we feel peace and joy in our mind, and 2, we have a sense of confidence that we are heading in the right direction. This is a taste of cessation appearing, a little bit of happiness, a little bit of light that has come into our hearts. And this is just the beginning. If that Dharma mind is maintained, nurtured, cultivated, and regularly practiced over months and years, then that happiness, that wisdom, that peace, that morality will shine forth much more brightly. That happiness will be many times greater. Dear Buddhist friends, look into your own minds. Since the time you came to know morality or began to practice until now, what progress have you made? How have those around you evaluated you? What level of happiness and peace have you attained? And so on. Then, compare yourself and consider that the noble saints are 1,000,000 times further along than us. If we understand this, we can appreciate how great the Buddha Dharma is. If we ourselves experience some peace and joy, we should understand that those who are diligent and energetic in their practice experience happiness 1,000,000 times greater than ours. And their wisdom is many times greater than ours. Such are the noble saints. Therefore, even if we think we haven't accomplished much, even if we've only progressed a little bit today, we already feel happy. How much more so for those who have gone very far, who are nearing the sunlight? How immense must their happiness be? Here, when I speak of sunlight, I use it as a symbol for the absolute Nibbana of the Buddha. I am not presenting an image of a paradise in the sky with celestial beings and concrete forms. I am simply using the image of the sun in the distant sky as an illustration, so we can understand each other. Thus, we see that every step, every movement we make on the path, is never a waste of effort. So, let each of us strive to practice in this way. Every step taken brings us closer to the truth of cessation. However, it is like this. The peace and happiness we attain is always a combination of merit and wisdom. We must consider these two factors to determine if our happiness is true and if we have truly arrived. For example, in the past, we might have been poor, without much money, and our material life was difficult. Then, after a long period of hard work combined with much good fortune and our own dedicated efforts, we suddenly become well off and have more possessions. We have escaped the suffering of poverty. Is this cessation? It is a part of it, isn't it? Yes, that's a part. So, for a practitioner, we don't immediately speak of lofty spiritual matters. First, we must assess our material life. To be assessed positively in terms of material life means we must first reduce the suffering of material poverty. We need to alleviate the constant worry about food, clothing, and money. This is the foundation. Our ancestors had a very true saying reflecting this. One must have sustenance to uphold the way. This means that only when one has enough to eat can one take care of spiritual matters. Similarly, only when our stomach is full can we attend to the mind, to meditation, to spiritual practice, to enlightenment. This is a practical reality. It's like this: if someone is poor, without enough food to eat or clothes to wear, and they say they are extremely happy, and you ask them about meditation and the path, but they haven't eaten breakfast and don't know what they'll eat for lunch, if they say that meditation is wonderful, it's not entirely credible. This isn't what we call being at ease amidst life and death. These are lofty poetic phrases that don't apply here. I assure you that kind of statement isn't believable. Why? Because it's generally not possible. It's not possible for someone who is severely lacking in merit, which is the karmic fruit of past generosity and ethical conduct, to achieve significant spiritual progress. This is a fundamental principle. There might be a few special exceptions, like in the Buddha's time, there were some who were terribly hungry yet attained arahantship, the state of full enlightenment. But those are unique cases due to exceptionally strong karmic connections from past lives. For ordinary people like us, when we talk about ending suffering, it must proceed gradually. And first, one must alleviate material suffering. This is the foundation. Why is it that when we speak of practice, we say it reduces suffering and that it must reduce material suffering first? It's because in our cultivation of meritorious deeds, the very first practice we undertake is generosity, giving. That's right. We must practice giving first. Since ancient times, we've known that practice begins with generosity. So, when the karmic results arrive, the material merits, such as improved well-being, must also come first, and then, gradually, the spiritual merits follow. This is a principle. That is why the Buddha taught us to practice the 5 precepts, basic ethical guidelines, and the 10 wholesome actions first, before we practice more advanced things. If we haven't practiced these foundational moralities, we cannot achieve other things. Why? Because when the karmic results come, if we don't have material stability, we cannot make spiritual progress. If you're worrying about what you're going to eat this evening, don't tell me you're going to sit and meditate right now. This is different for monastics, those who have fully dedicated their lives to the path. Why? Because monastics are those who have taken a great leap, a risk. When they go forth into homelessness, They leave behind their family, their home, the place that nurtured them. They dare to leave it all behind. They venture into uncertainty, not knowing what the next day will bring. They entrust themselves to others, to the community, not knowing if these people will care for them. They wonder, today, the lay supporters offer food, but will they still offer food in a few days? There's a lot of uncertainty. So, if they don't have some basis of merit, when people look at them, they might perceive them as consuming resources without sufficient inner cultivation. This is about balancing one's practice with the support one receives. It's a subtle aspect of cause and effect. Few people understand this. Sometimes we fall into imbalances. Later, if we face hardship, we don't understand why. These are important lessons. These are the intricacies of karma that can cause us to unexpectedly fall into hardship and poverty without our realizing it. Or, for example, sometimes in business, which is inherently competitive, we might follow advice that forces us to compete. But if our way of competing involves destroying another company, causing thousands of people to lose their jobs, then later on we too might fall into poverty without knowing why. Meanwhile, we might think we are a good person because we help the poor whenever we see them, we print and distribute Dharma books, and so on. So why am I suddenly in such dire straits? We wonder. It's because, in our business dealings, we unknowingly created very heavy negative karma that is hard to overcome. There are many such cases we are not aware of. Therefore, we must have the wisdom to discern cause and effect in every tiny detail. With so many past lives, we don't remember them all. But it is our duty when we practice to understand cause and effect thoroughly so as not to fall into these karmic predicaments that can arise and cause us to experience material suffering. That's the first thing. And at the same time, while experiencing material lack, we must still know how to practice generosity and make offerings. Offering the Dharma. Offering our physical efforts in many ways to help where we can. If we do this for 3 to 5 years, we will begin to see our material life improve a little. It becomes a bit more secure. At that point, we will have more time for spiritual practice. Once material suffering is alleviated, then spiritual cultivation can progress. Now, there are other kinds of suffering. The suffering of illness, is sickness suffering? It is. It's painful, feverish, perhaps coughing, wheezing, aches and pains. All these things make us suffer physically. So, practice must also alleviate these. This is also a way to reduce suffering. For example, if one is too afflicted by physical illness, spiritual progress also stagnates. If the body is like that, the mind cannot endure. Therefore, we must also cultivate merit in ways that address this. Besides practicing generosity to overcome the karma related to material lack. What other merits can we cultivate? One such practice is releasing living beings who are destined for slaughter, an act of compassion. Or offering medicine. There are many ways to reduce the suffering of illness and physical ailments. If the body is too sick and one is bedridden, talking about the path doesn't quite register, does it? If I were a poor, sickly and frail person, then no matter how well I spoke, people might not believe me. They might say, "Look at him, he practices so much, yet he's always aching and looking wretched. How can we believe what he says?" So, every day, I must pray, bow to the Buddha, and repent to reduce my negative karma to be less unsightly, less sick, less afflicted, so that I can practice. Then there's the karma of ignorance, of mental dullness. What does it mean to be dull? It means we read the scriptures but don't understand them. Or in daily life, whatever we try to learn, we can't grasp it. Or when someone speaks to us, we don't fully understand their meaning. Or in worldly affairs, we cannot assess, judge, or organize things properly. This state of dullness is truly pitiable. In life, when we meet people, we might initially assess them based on their material possessions. Secondly, we assess them based on their intelligence. When we meet people who are intelligent and sharp, who can see issues clearly, we naturally feel a sense of respect. This is because a person's value is indeed often linked to their intellect. Humans are generally considered superior to animals because of their minds. If a human being is less intelligent than some animals, then we're in trouble. It is because we are generally more intelligent that we can manage our world. So, what ultimately distinguishes people is often their mind, their intelligence. If we speak of physical strength or dexterity, we humans are inferior to many animals. We are weaker than many large animals and less agile than creatures like monkeys. Consider this. Even a small monkey can be very strong and quick. If you were alone in the forest and confronted an aggressive monkey, the monkey might well win. Why? Because it can bite and scratch so quickly you can't react, you can't run away fast enough. So we see that even a small animal can overpower us in some ways. But what allows us to be superior is our mind. Therefore, the suffering of ignorance is also a very significant form of suffering. So, how should we practice? We must also alleviate this suffering of ignorance. We must become more intelligent, wiser. And how do we become wiser and more intelligent? Besides formal study, which is obvious, we must cultivate merit. We often say that virtue is the cause of talent. A virtuous person will naturally become more intelligent. If we often perform acts of kindness, we will naturally become more intelligent. If we bow to the Buddha frequently with sincere reverence, we will naturally become more intelligent. If we love others deeply with genuine compassion, we will also naturally become more intelligent. So, there are many ways to cultivate intelligence. For instance, regarding bowing to the Buddha, I often tell parents whose children are struggling in school to encourage them to bow to the Buddha with respect, and their studies will often improve. This is very clear from experience. I myself was a mediocre student. I didn't understand much when I listened to lectures. Then I took up one practice, simply to cultivate love for people. Wherever I went, I would constantly remind myself to love people. After some time, I became more intelligent. And after more time, even more intelligent. It's very clear. So there are many ways. If initially we are not very intelligent, but over time, through practice, we become more intelligent, then we have also reduced a portion of the suffering due to ignorance. This is one part of the path to cessation. Then there's another kind of suffering, sadness, sorrow. This means many things happen that make our hearts sorrowful. What kinds of things make us sad? We've studied the truth of suffering, haven't we? There are so many things in this world that can bring sorrow to our hearts. Being criticized by others can make us sad. Being left by a loved one can make us sad. Leaving a loved one can also bring sorrow, not joy. It's very painful. So, the sorrow in the heart is a kind of suffering. Here, we must overcome it. How? In the same circumstances where previously we would have been sorrowful, now our mind can remain steadfast. We can keep our mind at peace. I remember once I met a young lady who came to talk to me, and she cried from the beginning to the end of our conversation. I asked her why she was crying. She then recounted her story, and as I listened, it seemed like a very common situation. Many people experience similar things, but she was crying so much. This shows that her mind was weak. This too is a kind of karmic affliction of vulnerability. If that same person were to diligently bow to the Buddha, to love others, to actively cultivate merit, then that sadness would also vanish quickly. Sorrow is like a disease in the mind. Here, we should pay attention. If we find ourselves often feeling sad and sorrowful, it's a sign that there might be a chronic illness, a sickness in our mind. So we must overcome it. And how do we overcome it? There are many powerful methods. Generosity, making merit, bowing to the Buddha, cultivating loving kindness, all these can cure it. We have several medicines that are said to cure all such diseases of the mind. What are they? Bowing to the Buddha. What else? Cultivating loving kindness and compassion. What else? Generosity. And what else? Repentance and purification of past unskillful actions. So, we have these few medicines. Whatever the mental illness, just apply them with diligence and they are very efficacious. Everything can be healed. Remember that. Once we've understood this, it means all of us sitting here can become physicians for our own minds and help others too. If someone comes to us complaining of such sorrow, we can prescribe this remedy. Go and bow to the Buddha every day with a sincere heart, practice loving kindness, and when you do, remember your own transient nature like dust, like grass, and remember to practice generosity. I guarantee that in a few days, your illness will be gone. They will smile. Anyone who complains, just offer this and they will be happy to do it and they'll be surprised at how effective you are. But in truth, we just have these few profound, time-tested remedies. Then there's another kind of suffering, the suffering of an unquiet mind. This refers to the suffering we endure or actively create through our own agitated, insecure, afflicted states like selfishness, envy, or resentment. These also cause suffering. They make us very uneasy, not at ease at all. For example, if in a community of 10 people living together, we harbor dislike or resentment towards the other 9, are we happy? No, it weighs heavily on our minds. Conversely, if we can learn to love those 9 people in our community, we will feel happy in their presence. So, it is like this: loving kindness brings peace. Wherever loving kindness is present, joy appears. And what is joy? It is a part of cessation. The presence of cessation of Nibbana brings joy. Perhaps we are a selfish person. We live for ourselves, only caring for our own concerns. Then suddenly we encounter the Dharma, and we start to care for others. When we care for others, we might think it will be arduous, but surprisingly, when we care for others, we find ourselves happier. That is a part of cessation. This is speaking about human beings. But if we go to higher heavenly realms, the suffering is less, the happiness is more, and the freedom is much greater. According to the Buddha's teachings, there are many levels, many realms in the heavens. The lowest are the realms of the 4 heavenly kings who guard the world, then gradually ascending. There are realms like the heaven of the 33 Svatisa, where the god Sacca presides, and even higher, the Brahma realms, such as the realm of a great Brahma god. These heavenly realms are places of great joy, immense joy. When we hear this, we are more impressed by the Buddha's wisdom, that he could perceive such things. As for us, we do not know. In each higher heavenly realm, the happiness is much greater, and the freedom is more extensive. It's like this: even sitting here, perhaps nearly half the people here have been to a heavenly realm before in a past life. Do you remember? Actually, it's not that difficult to be reborn in a heavenly realm. According to the teachings, if we read the Buddhist scriptures, we will see that it's not inherently hard to attain such a rebirth. If we are virtuous, not too unwholesome in our actions, know how to practice basic meditation, know how to show reverence to the Buddha, and know how to cultivate merit through good deeds, then upon death, it is quite possible to be reborn in a heavenly realm. However, we don't stay there for an exceptionally long time if our merit isn't truly immense. Then we are reborn again, perhaps back in the human realm. Once back in the human realm, we might start going to the temple again, practicing anew. And in a future life, we might go up to a heavenly realm again. So, rebirth in such pleasant states is not impossibly difficult if one cultivates the causes. When I say this, I am fairly confident. A significant portion of people have experienced heavenly rebirths in their long cycle of existence, perhaps even relatively recently in their karmic history. Up there, in those heavenly realms, existence is quite remarkable. For example, right now, we see our hair is a certain color, but maybe we wish it were different. If we were in a heavenly realm, we would just have to wish for it, and it would instantly change to the desired color. We wouldn't need to go to a salon. Here on Earth, many people dye their hair various shades, but we have to spend money and effort. Up there, with just a thought, it changes instantly. The same goes for clothes. If we want a simple set of clothes, a simple set appears. If we want beautiful, elaborate clothes, they appear instantly. That is the life of a celestial being, a deva. Compare that to the life of, say, a chicken. The status of a chicken compared to a human is so vastly inferior. Unless, of course, we have a specific karmic debt towards chickens, then one day we might have to be born as a chicken and be caught. But if we don't have such a debt, we would never wish to be a chicken. Even if we happen to raise chickens and are fond of them as pets. Now, imagine a celestial being looking down from heaven. They look down at people and see that, well, people have cars to drive, nice clothes to wear, and they can change their appearance somewhat. It seems acceptable from a distance. But in truth, would any celestial being ever wish to be human? Given the choice from their perspective, the status of a human being and that of a celestial being are very far apart in terms of immediate pleasure and ease. So, celestial beings in those realms seem to have a source of happiness that brings them closer to a kind of temporary cessation of gross suffering. There are holy beings who do not attain full enlightenment in the human realm but attain it in a celestial realm. What kind of holy beings are these? They are the non-returners, the anagamis. Those who attain the fruit of a non-returner in the human realm upon death are reborn in a specific type of celestial realm known as a pure abode, and they are certain to attain Nibbana there, without returning to the human realm or any lower realm again. There are such cases. Some beings must return to the human realm to attain enlightenment. For example, stream enterers, sotapannas, or once-returners, sakadagamis, are typically reborn as humans to reach full enlightenment. But non-returners often attain it in the celestial realms. It's quite an interesting aspect of the path. Now, I've been talking at length about various forms of happiness and cessation of suffering. Let's speak about absolute Nibbana, the ultimate goal. Is Nibbana a state of being, a state of mind, a place of peace? When I say this, can you fully grasp it? Perhaps not entirely. Truthfully, I too cannot fully convey it in words alone. This Nibbana is a state that no one, in the ordinary sense, can fully grasp through mere words or intellectual concepts. We are just using words, trying to point towards a little of its meaning, but no one can truly comprehend it through words alone. Imagine this, a triangle. Let's say we have a triangle with its base at the bottom and its apex, its point, at the top. Now, within this triangle, imagine we divide it into many horizontal sections parallel to the base, going all the way up to the point at the top. The closer to the base, the wider the section, right? And as we go up towards the apex, it gets narrower and narrower. And when it reaches the very peak, what is it? It's a dimensionless point, isn't it? And what are the dimensions of a point in mathematics? It has no dimensions, right? That's the principle. A point is defined as having no dimensions. So, where is this state of Nibbana located? When does it exist in terms of our usual understanding of time and space? Because it has no temporal or spatial dimensions in the way we usually think. Yet, is it nothing? Or is it everything? It is described paradoxically. It is, in one sense, like that dimensionless point, nothing at all from a conventional standpoint, and yet, in another sense, it is everything, the totality. Do you understand? Please, don't just nod along if it's not clear. Truthfully, when you hear this statement, Nibbana is a fundamental nature that is, from one perspective, nothing at all, and yet, from another, it is everything. It sounds like a paradox. But if someone hears this statement and feels a sense of joy and acceptance, what does that tell us about them? It indicates that within this person's heart, there are great, deep roots of connection with the Buddha Dharma to be able to accept such a statement. If we follow ordinary logic, we wouldn't accept it. But if we can hear this paradox and accept it with an open mind, it means there's some profound karmic root within our minds, perhaps from a very ancient past. We've come of age spiritually, so to speak, to be receptive to such a profound truth. That's why it's said that Nibbana is a state without conventional dimension, incredibly subtle. Infinitesimally so from one point of view. Yet it is also infinitely vast, becoming, in a sense, the very fabric of ultimate reality. If we hear this statement and can joyfully accept it, even though we haven't seen it, known it, or realized it directly, but we accept it with joyful reverence, then it's highly probable that within our minds, there are seeds of enlightenment. If one can hear that and joyfully accept it, the Buddha indicated such a person is like one who has a lit lamp inside a covered pot. The pot isn't broken yet. Meaningful enlightenment hasn't been reached, but inside, a lamp is dimly lit. We don't know on which day they will attain full enlightenment, but the potential is definitely there. So, to hear that Nibbana is an infinitesimally subtle nature, without conventional dimension, yet it is the entire cosmos in its ultimate reality. And to joyfully accept it, this indicates very great good roots, very strong positive karmic imprints. Let's talk about small. Currently, in physics, what is the smallest thing they have discovered? They speak of fundamental particles like quarks, but they are still exploring, still digging deeper. Many of these fundamental particles are still largely theoretical, not yet fully proven or understood. We know about atoms as the basic constituent of matter, but within the atom, there are subatomic particles like electrons, and then within the nucleus, protons, neutrons, and so on. These are subatomic particles. But scientists are not satisfied. Even though these particles are incredibly tiny, unimaginably small, they say if you could break them further, there might be even smaller components. One day, science may discover more about the subtle nature of reality. But the Nibbana pointed to by the Buddha transcends even these concepts. Even celestial beings in heavenly realms, enjoying their meritorious blessings for vast periods, must eventually, after exhausting perhaps 1,000 eons of such enjoyment, be reborn. Often back into the human realm or other realms within the cycle of existence, known as samsara. This is the power of karma. It carries us along, and we generally cannot resist it. For example, right now, we cannot resist the moment we have to die. We live until a certain point, and then we must die. That is karma carrying us towards death. And then, in the intermediate state after death, at some point, our karma will draw us into a new womb for rebirth. That is karma leading us, and we don't have much choice in the matter if our minds are untrained. A person with great accumulated merit from past wholesome actions might have some choice or influence over their rebirth, but a person with little merit has little choice. Karma places us in a certain womb, and we have to accept it. If we are lucky and karma places us in the womb of a billionaire's family, that's fortunate from a worldly perspective. But if we are unlucky and karma places us in the womb of someone living on the streets, our fate will be very different. We must endure the cold winter, dreaming of a warm, happy family. Or even worse, if karma places us in the womb of an animal, say a dog, then what? We become a dog. We cannot easily resist our past karma without diligent practice and purification. For example, those who are advanced in their spiritual practice, when they are about to die, they might perceive several potential families where they could be reborn. And at that moment, they can, to some extent, choose which family they wish to go to. They have that degree of choice. The more merit one has, the more freedom one possesses. Those with little merit have little freedom. So, we must remember the law of cause and effect, the law of karma. Not everyone has such freedom. Only those with significant merit have more choice. And why would someone get to choose from several families for their rebirth? Perhaps one family is wealthy but has unfavorable genetic predispositions or a difficult environment. Another family might be poorer but has members who are very intelligent and kind. Another family might be in a position of power and influence. So one starts to consider. This option has this advantage but that disadvantage. After much deliberation, one might finally decide, well, maybe not the wealthiest, but a beautiful and kind environment is good enough. And they are reborn there, quite content with their choice. We were talking about heavenly realms. Even if we exhaust all our merits in a heavenly realm, we still have to come down to be reborn elsewhere, propelled by the remaining power of our karma. However, for a person who has attained full enlightenment and arahant, this entire cycle of rebirth completely ceases. Within that enlightened nature, one is no longer swept into the cycle of rebirth by the force of karma. When we say this, we should use these terms carefully. This is a point related to right view, a correct understanding. As Buddhists, we must understand this clearly. Mahayana Buddhism, one of the major traditions of Buddhism, has opened up a path for bodhisattvas. Bodhisattvas are beings who, out of great compassion, choose to re-enter the cycle of birth and death, samsara, to help other beings. For example, instead of realizing Nibbana and abiding in the supreme peace and happiness of that state, no longer being swept away by karma, they choose to be reborn. And don't misunderstand Nibbana as a desolate, boring state. It is described as supremely blissful. But instead of enjoying that bliss in solitude, these great beings vow to be reborn to help sentient beings, perhaps in the human realm or in heavenly realms. Bodhisattvas can go to many places to aid others. So, when a bodhisattva comes to the human realm, it is due to their great vow of compassion. Not due to karmic compulsion from past negative deeds. It is their own intention, similar to how we said someone with great merit might choose their rebirth. These bodhisattvas have great spiritual power, freedom, and the ability to choose their circumstances to best benefit others. For example, such a being might wish to cause the Buddha Dharma to flourish again, especially if they see people overly focused on mere scholarly study, neglecting actual practice. They might then manifest in a way that, even without extensive scholarly learning, they still attain enlightenment and become famous, thereby inspiring people not to waste too much time on study alone, but to dedicate more time to actual spiritual practice and meditation. Consider, for example, the sixth patriarch of Chan Zen Buddhism in China, Venerable Huaining. It is said that at that time, perhaps there was too much emphasis on extensive textual study in Buddhism. People were racing to learn and spending a vast amount of time on the scriptures. So he manifested as a layperson, even as someone who was said to be illiterate in his youth. Yet, he realized the way and received the mind seal transmission from the fifth patriarch, Hongren. Later in life, did he remain illiterate? No. For a patriarch, learning to read is not difficult, and due to his merit and wisdom, he could learn easily. History often doesn't tell the whole story. We shouldn't imagine he was illiterate his entire life. He lived a very long life. Earlier, because his father died young, he had to work hard felling trees and selling firewood to support his mother, so he didn't have much formal schooling. Don't think he was completely unable to read any characters. He would have known some basic characters and texts. It's just that he wasn't extensively learned in the conventional sense. Because Chinese characters are typically learned one by one, you only know the ones you've studied. So, perhaps his vocabulary was not vast initially. But don't think he knew absolutely nothing. Later, when he emerged to teach and transform beings, he would have had time and would have learned to read and study. In his old age, he was certainly very erudite. But his initial manifestation served as an awakening for people not to chase after excessive learning alone, but to balance it with direct experience and practice. In Buddhism, we have the term cultivation and study tu hoc in Vietnamese, which implies both practicing/developing the mind and learning the teachings. In some other traditions, they might emphasize only cultivation or training, tu luyen, focusing on developing specific skills or powers. They have methods of practice and training, and they achieve very high abilities. For example, those who practice certain martial arts or internal alchemy can train their bodies to perform extraordinary feats. Or those who follow some esoteric paths might have spells, talismans, and magical abilities. They achieve these through long training. Many other religions or schools focus on this kind of specific cultivation or training. But in Buddhism, we emphasize both cultivation, practice, and study, learning the Dharma. So, if we only study and don't practice, we won't have any special spiritual attainments. But if we only practice, cultivate specific techniques, without the wisdom from studying the Dharma, what happens? It's easy to go astray, to take a wrong path. Therefore, we must have a balance between cultivation/training and study/practice. We must allocate time and effort for both. So, when a bodhisattva appears, they propagate the Dharma. They do so in various ways that worldly people may not comprehend, but ultimately it is for the benefit of beings. That is speaking of their proactive choice to help. There are even bodhisattvas who, according to the scriptures, manifest as kings or leaders to cause the Dharma to flourish, to protect the Dharma, and so on. Let's discuss some special characteristics of Nibbana further. It is a state where an individual, in a profound sense, has become one with all, or has realized the emptiness of a separate self, thereby encompassing all. What does it mean for an individual to become all in this way? This is a bit difficult to understand with our ordinary minds. All of us have an ego, a sense of a separate, isolated self. When one realizes Nibbana, that ego, that sense of a separate self, dissolves to nothing. And when the ego dissolves, who is the one sitting here? In a profound way, one realizes one's interconnectedness with all sentient beings, or realizes the selfless nature that underlies all. This is the difficult point to grasp intellectually. Imagine a person sitting there, perhaps with gray hair, wearing glasses. If they have not realized the way, they still have a strong sense of an individual ego, and that person is just that particular person. For example, if a nun's Dharma name is Ocean of Virtue, she is perceived as Sister Ocean of Virtue. But if she were to realize the way and her limited sense of ego disappeared, then when we look at that same person sitting there with the same gray hair, the same glasses, the same Dharma name, we would not ordinarily suspect that this person is now, in essence, experiencing a reality that embraces all sentient beings. When we look with ordinary eyes, conditioned by our own ego, we cannot understand this. Only one who has realized the way knows this directly. Do you understand the profundity of this? It's quite a deep concept. It is a place, a state, where the individual realizes their true nature, which is not separate from the totality. A place where no self, anatta, is realized, not as annihilation, but as liberation from the confines of a limited ego. When one is no longer confined to being just oneself in a limited sense, one has, in a way, become one with all sentient life through wisdom and compassion. Then, without even speaking of love as an emotion directed from one separate being to another, that state is love. Overflowing and complete. Why do parents love their children so much? One might say it's instinct. But let's put it this way, because our child is, in a very real sense, a part of ourselves. If our child is hurt, even if we don't know why, we feel the pain, don't we? We see our child as an extension of ourselves. So love arises naturally. Even without saying, I love you, the love is there. Many here who have children will understand this deep connection. This is an analogy. Parents love their children because they see the child as a part of themselves. But for a holy being, an arahant, a Buddha, they see all sentient beings not just as a distant part of themselves, but through the profound realization of interconnectedness and selflessness. They experience a boundless empathy and connection. When all sentient beings are perceived in this way, as ultimately not separate from oneself, then one doesn't need to speak of love as a conditional emotion. It is boundless love, overflowing, absolute, endless love. This overflowing, absolute, endless love is what we call great loving-kindness, Mahametta, and great compassion, Mahakaru. Do you understand now? Isn't it wonderful? Isn't the Buddha Dharma beautiful in its profundity? We must bow our heads in reverence. Even if we haven't realized it ourselves, just by reasoning and understanding it intellectually, we can see how sublime it is. To see the heart of the Buddha in this way is a great joy. From our limited perspective, we see the Buddha and ourselves as different. But from the Buddha's enlightened perspective, the Buddha and all beings are interconnected in a way that transcends our ordinary understanding of self and other. This is a point that ordinary thought cannot fully reach and language cannot adequately express. Let's return to an example. Imagine we could travel back in time more than 2,500 years, to the time of the Buddha. Imagine that day we were walking on a road, but perhaps that's a thought experiment for another time. For now, let's come back to the present day and continue our discussion. So it is like that. When we don't understand another's inner state of realization, we might think our own conventional way of seeing things is the only way, but that enlightened being sees themselves and all sentient beings as profoundly interconnected. Whichever sentient being appears before them, that being and the sage share the same ultimate selfless nature. Although in language, the sage still uses words as if there is a self and others. To make it seem normal for us and to communicate effectively, in their heart, they experience this profound unity. Therefore, it's not a matter of saying love. It is love, true and deep compassion for all. That is why today we kneel before the image of the Buddha with such deep reverence. We need to understand one crucial thing in this world. It's possible that everyone might dislike us. Perhaps because we've lost an eye and can't see well, or lost a leg and can't walk, or half our face is disfigured. For example, if we are extremely deformed or perceived as unpleasant, it's possible that no one in this world would seem to love us. But we can know for certain there is one being, or one principle of enlightened compassion that always embraces us. Who or what is that? It is the Buddha, the enlightened nature. Therefore, in our loneliest moments, in our moments of deepest sorrow and despair, let us come before the Buddha or connect with that principle of enlightenment within. Let us bow down. Let us express all our innermost feelings. We will find a source of boundless love and compassion to take refuge in, and we will surely find some form of liberation or solace. So, even if everyone in this world seems to despise us, the Buddha's compassion always enfolds us. Let us understand this. Understanding this, how should we then live? This understanding can be a great motivation. If we always want to be embraced by the Buddha's compassion, then we should vow, even if no one loves me, I vow that my heart will strive to love everyone. One day, I will aim to be a source of refuge and support for others, for those who are suffering, who are in despair, who are lonely. Make such a vow, because we know we can receive that boundless compassion from the principle of Buddhahood, from the enlightened heart. This Nibbana, this state of cessation, is the place where ignorance, avijja in Pali, the fundamental misunderstanding of reality, completely ends. And what replaces ignorance? Wisdom or clear knowing, vijja. But the language used to describe this state is often very modest. Like we said earlier, a person who has no place left to store their money when asked if they are doing well might say, "Oh, I'm no longer poor." They speak modestly, but in truth, they are incredibly wealthy. Consider this. If we look at a person with ordinary perception, our knowing is separate from the object known. There is a knower and an object that is known. For example, if we hear someone speak, there is a listener and a sound that is heard. These two are distinct in our usual experience. But in the awakened perception of a Buddha or an arahant, the knower and the ultimate nature of what is known are not separate in the same way. There is a unified, direct seeing. For instance, if an ordinary person wants to know if someone is a good person, they might look at their face, their actions, their words, and then try to infer or deduce something about their character. but for an awakened being because they have transcended the illusion of a separate self and directly perceive the nature of reality. Their understanding is more holistic and intuitive. They understand the person's mind, their tendencies, their karmic background, their potential. That is the intuitive perception of a noble one. Our ordinary knowing is based on inference and sensory input, but a noble one's knowing includes direct, intuitive insight. This might sound complex, but it points to a different order of experiencing reality. Another characteristic often associated with high spiritual attainment, such as Nibbana or arahantship, is the development of certain supernormal abilities, abhina in Pali. The Buddha spoke of 6 such abilities, which include, for example, the ability to know one's own countless past lives, to remember all one's countless past lives, and to remember them clearly. In which family one was born, what one's name was, who one's parents were, what actions one performed in that life, remembering and knowing it all. If one could do that, one might ask, what was my very first life in this beginningless cycle of rebirth? Does anyone wonder about that? If you wonder, it means you accept the Buddha's teaching that we have past lives and a life before that, and so on, in a cycle without a discernible first beginning. So, what was the very first life? Are you still curious about that? Well, the teaching is that if you practice diligently and attain enlightenment, then you will understand the nature of the cycle. For now, that question about a first life is considered unanswerable in a way that satisfies our conceptual mind, because the cycle of samsara is described as being without a discoverable beginning. Only an enlightened sage, a Buddha, truly understands the profound nature of this beginningless process. That is why they know this world of appearances is like a play, like a dream, in its ultimate reality. So, one might remember 10 lives, 100 lives, 1,000 lives. But when it comes to the conceptual very first arising point of an individual stream of consciousness in this beginningless cycle, one becomes silent, unable to speak of it in conventional terms. It is said that the ultimate origin of samsara is like that. Only those who know directly can truly understand its nature, and know when and how to speak or when to remain silent. The profound greatness of Nibbana is that words can never exhaust its meaning. If we want to describe Nibbana, we can never say it all. However, because later generations could not always fully realize or understand it to the ultimate degree from direct experience, different perspectives and schools of thought arose. This sometimes led to distinctions being made, for example, between the understanding of Nibbana in what is known as the Theravada tradition, sometimes referred to as the School of the Elders, and the Mahayana tradition, the Great Vehicle. Each tradition may emphasize different aspects or facets of Nibbana or use different language to describe it. For example, those who understand according to the classical Theravada tradition might say that Nibbana is the state where ignorance ends, defilements cease, liberation from suffering is attained, and there is no more rebirth in samsara. This is one way of understanding it. Is it correct? Yes, it is very correct from that perspective. Not a single word is wrong. It's one valid way of understanding. But there is also another perspective, often emphasized in the Mahayana tradition. The Mahayana tradition might speak of Nibbana in terms of great emptiness, mahasunyata, the understanding that all phenomena are empty of inherent, independent existence, profound wisdom, prajna, vast spiritual powers used for the benefit of others, the bodhisattva's altruistic deeds, skillful manifestation and transformation in the world, and the non-dual nature of samsara and Nibbana, meaning that ultimate reality is not separate from this very world when perceived with wisdom. Is this also correct? Yes, from its own perspective. It is also correct. Both perspectives offer profound insights. Ideally, one should strive to understand the comprehensive Nibbana of the Buddha, which an arahant or a Buddha fully realizes. And this would encompass the truths pointed to by both these perspectives when understood deeply. But if we speak from within a particular school or interpretative framework, it might appear as if they are describing two separate things. Therefore, when we understand this, if in the future someone speaks of Buddhism as having different schools or vehicles, implying a fundamental split in the ultimate goal, what should we do? We should just smile with understanding. We know that these are often just different ways of approaching or emphasizing aspects of an incredibly profound and multifaceted truth. We hope that everyone can understand the core teachings correctly so that Buddhism is no longer perceived as being irreconcilably divided. We haven't finished speaking about all aspects of the truth of cessation today. We'll schedule another time to continue this exploration. We have a few minutes left, and I'd like to address a question that has arisen, which is quite important. It relates to a recent incident concerning a very respected teacher, the most venerable abbot of Truck Lam Monastery. During a Dharma talk, the most venerable is reported to have rebuked some of his disciples very strongly, even saying that anyone who followed a particular monk, referring to myself, the speaker of this talk you are hearing an English version of, would go to the great hells. This reported statement caused some people to become quite confused and concerned. I would like to explain a little from my perspective. When I was a child, if my father disciplined me physically, my brothers and I generally wouldn't cry. Because boys in that culture were often taught to endure pain. We wouldn't cry. Only when our mother disciplined us, we might kneel, bow our heads, apologize to our mother, and that would be it. We wouldn't repeat the offense. But one time, when my mother called me to lie down for a caning, after she hit me, I cried. My mother was surprised and asked, "Why did you cry today when I disciplined you? Usually you don't." I replied, "Because today, when you hit me, it didn't hurt as much as the previous times. I know you are getting weaker. I fear the day you leave me will not be far off." For us, as disciples, our relationship with a true spiritual teacher can be similar in its depth of feeling. In the past, when I was with the most venerable, my teacher, he would scold and correct me directly if I had any fault. I valued that direct guidance. But today, I no longer have the same degree of that direct interaction. Now, if the most venerable wishes to scold or correct me, it often has to be through an intermediary, perhaps via a message conveyed by others. Only then do I get to hear his words. So, that change in circumstance is a source of sadness for me. We should understand this when a true Zen master, whom many regard as a living Buddha, as a saint, scolds or reprimands, there is almost always a profound reason, a deep intention. It is not scolding in the ordinary human way, out of anger or personal animosity. If the most venerable had to rebuke us, his disciples, so severely, there would be a purpose. Firstly, it could be to alert us, to make us realize that we still have many faults and areas for improvement. He might have reprimanded so heavily to ensure we do not become complacent or arrogant. For example, if one gives a few Dharma talks and a number of followers gather and one starts to think oneself accomplished, that is a very grave error. One loses spiritual merit that way. So, the most venerable, perhaps even through an intermediary, might have rebuked very severely, very decisively to counteract such tendencies. And that rebuke, if it came from him, would contain the wisdom of a great Zen master. It is not the ordinary speech of a common person. So, when we hear such a statement, if it indeed came from him, we might feel sad. Perhaps because we no longer have the happiness of being directly by our teacher's side to be taught and guided in person, but must be corrected indirectly like this. And for those of us who are his disciples, we know we must be much more restrained, much more diligent in correcting ourselves, so that the most venerable, from afar, will not have to worry or be saddened by our shortcomings. So, please understand that the most venerable is, and always will be, our deeply respected teacher. Every word, every gesture of a true teacher often has a profound meaning and is ultimately for the benefit of all beings, even if it appears harsh on the surface. Many people were confused when they heard reports of the most venerable rebuking some of us so harshly. Sometimes you see someone out in public, and they're talking animatedly and laughing loudly. That doesn't necessarily mean they are enlightened or spiritually advanced. The truly enlightened person is often very ordinary in their outward appearance. The image of an arahant, a hidden saint, can sometimes be found unexpectedly, perhaps even in popular culture, like in a movie such as Star Wars. We might watch a Star Wars film, and in it, one of the greatest masters in the galaxy, a being with immense spiritual power, appears as a tiny old creature, looking perhaps like a little green alien, small and unassuming. But this character possesses the spiritual depth of a saint. In such fictional stories, enlightened or wise beings can take many forms, not necessarily human as we know ourselves. Some might look like fish-like creatures, some like insects, some like amphibians. But this particular wise master, perhaps the highest spiritual guide in that fictional universe, takes the form of a tiny, unassuming creature. Normally, he walks around with a cane, looking quite ordinary and unremarkable. He speaks slowly and gently, but when a critical situation arises, he draws his lightsaber, his weapon of light, and fights with incredible skill or uses a mystical force to overcome obstacles. You wouldn't know his power from his ordinary appearance. Those who understand such films deeply might see parallels or allegories for spiritual truths. Perhaps the future of humanity, or any advanced civilization, will be like that. People will be skilled in both technology and spirituality. And those who are proficient in both will be true leaders. Therefore, if anyone here wants to be a true leader in any sense, please practice diligently the path of wisdom and compassion. In the future, you might have profound insight and abilities like that fictional Zen master living an ordinary life but ready to act decisively and wisely when needed. It's like a master of martial arts normally. You wouldn't know their skill. They might appear unassuming, concealing their abilities. But when an important matter arises, you see their extraordinary capabilities. However, in Buddhism, while certain abilities may arise with spiritual development, the emphasis is not on showing off powers, but on wisdom and compassion. A true holy person in Buddhism must have these qualities of wisdom and compassion, which may manifest in various abilities. Nibbana in Buddhism is truly a great and profound state. However, one must still walk the path to reach it. If a person has the strength and opportunity, should they keep going on this path? Of course. But if you tell someone they have to walk directly from their remote village all the way to a distant capital city in one go, without any rest stops, they might not be willing to undertake such a long and arduous journey. They might refuse. Therefore, in some Buddhist texts like the Lotus Sutra, there is the parable of the apparition city, an illusory city created by a wise guide to give weary travelers a place to rest and regain their strength before continuing on to the true destination. It's the same on the spiritual path. If we feel we have no wisdom yet and we ask our teacher, if I want to attain enlightenment, how many years must I practice? And if the teacher looks at our capacity and says, well, with your current disposition, you'll probably need to practice for about 1,000 kalpas, eons. Upon hearing that, we might just say goodbye to the teacher forever. 1,000 eons? We wouldn't dare look at their face again. It's too frightening and discouraging. So, if there's something we can do that yields perceptible results in 2 or 3 years, we'll be more motivated to do it. If we go to a temple and ask a Dharma master, how long until I experience some benefit or receive some blessing? And they say, practice diligently for 3 years, then you'll see results. We'd be more willing to try. After 3 years, we might receive some encouragement, some positive feedback, and feel we can go out and perhaps even help others or teach or travel. Or if someone wants to become a fortune teller and asks a master, if I study with you, how long until I can be a fortune teller like you? And the master looks at their features and says, well, with your aptitude, if I teach you for 1.5 years, you can become a proficient fortune teller, then they'd eagerly study. Short, seemingly achievable goals are appealing. But if we're told it takes 1,000 eons to attain enlightenment, we might give up. But in truth, for most of us, does it take many, many eons of practice throughout countless lives? Yes, the journey through samsara is very long. We've already been through who knows how many eons. We've probably practiced in past lives, forgotten, practiced again, forgotten again. And now we've stumbled in here to listen once more. Please, try not to forget this time. If you hadn't forgotten your past efforts, you wouldn't be sitting here in this current state. You'd perhaps be in a much higher state of spiritual development. Because we tend to forget, that's why we are as we are. Therefore, when those wise teachers encounter someone who asks, Venerable Sir, how long must I practice before I see results? If the teacher looks at their face and sees they are, let's say, of somewhat dull capacity, with limited immediate wisdom, they might say, oh, you just practice diligently for about 6 months, and you'll feel healthier and more energetic. Hearing that, we'd be motivated to follow. And after 6 months, even if we don't see anything dramatically special, the teacher might say, well, I see you've made progress, you're looking better, your mind is calmer, and then we start to feel we've achieved something. The teacher says this because our capacity at that moment might need such encouragement. But if one encounters a bright, intelligent person with strong potential and they ask the same question, how might the wise teacher respond? They might say, only a fool asks about time. The questioner should then just quiet their mind and not persist with such a question. This directness can sometimes hurt one's pride, lead to resentment, and even drive people away if they are not ready for it. But someone without such pride, who recognizes the teacher's wisdom, wouldn't get angry or offended. When a person of true wisdom approaches a teacher, even if the teacher scolds or seems to chase them away, they understand this might be a skillful means, a test of the disciple's patience and determination. So even if rebuked, they remain calm. If they ask how long it will take and are told, "Be quiet, only a fool asks about time. Just practice." Don't ask about time, and that time might stretch for several hundred eons, they accept it. Why? Because from the perspective of an enlightened being, conventional time is ultimately without substance. It has no ultimate fixed value. We ordinary beings, when we hear 1 eon, 2 eons, 5 eons, it sounds incredibly long. But for a person of great wisdom, even 1,000 years can be perceived as if it's in the palm of their hand in terms of the vastness of cosmic time and the timeless nature of ultimate reality. We are sitting here now. If I ask you how long until you die, can anyone give an exact answer? Who can say how long until they die? No one ever thinks they will die immediately, right? If our understanding is limited, we might think, oh, maybe another 20 years. We'll enjoy another 20 New Year celebrations, another 20 springs. But if we look at our heads, maybe our hair is already gray. We might mumble to ourselves, probably not even another 10 years. But we don't truly know. Perhaps in a moment we could have a stroke and die instantly. So, we often think in these uncertain terms. But when the Buddha asked his disciples, when does death come, many gave different answers. Some said, often, one sleeps at night and is dead by morning. The Buddha didn't fully accept that answer as reflecting the deepest understanding. Someone else asked, if one doesn't have rice to eat, one dies, right? He didn't fully accept that either. Only when someone answered, when the breath stops, one dies immediately, or more precisely, death can come between one breath and the next, did the Buddha fully accept it. This means that person lives with mindful awareness in every moment. Breathing in, know you are breathing in. Breathing out, know you are breathing out. Nothing more needs to be known beyond this present moment awareness for this specific insight. One doesn't need to know what will happen an hour later, a day later, or a year later. When one just knows the breath as it is, coming in and going out with full presence, that person has touched upon a profound aspect of the way. The Buddha accepted this immediately. It doesn't involve calculating long periods of future time. Therefore, a person of wisdom doesn't fixate on how many years old they are in a conventional sense. They always consider death to be right before their eyes in the sense that it can come at any moment. It's not that they are pessimistic, but they see time differently, with a sense of urgency and preciousness of the present moment. For them, even 30 years can seem as close as right now, in terms of the swift passage of time. This is the mark of wisdom. They don't see it as long. When they hear 100 eons, they aren't daunted in the same way an ordinary person might be. A person of wisdom, hearing another 100 eons of practice might be needed, remains perfectly calm. 100 eons, they are not afraid as long as in every present moment they are aware of each breath in and out, and are making diligent effort. Let's pause here. When we speak of the apparition city, that skillful means from the Lotus Sutra, it's generally for people like us, who are easily daunted by the perceived length of time on the spiritual path. So, the Buddha, out of compassion, sets out intermediate stages and goals, step by step, to encourage us. When we practice and achieve some meaningful results, for example, our life becomes more fortunate, our mind becomes more peaceful, we feel we have more clarity, more wisdom. Our morality improves. We know this is also something very precious, not insignificant. But it is just a temporary station and apparition city. We should not become attached to it. We should not cling to it, and certainly not boast about it. Then we can continue further on the journey. If we boast or become complacent, we stop progressing or even regress. These are precious attainments. For example, in the past, our mind was agitated. We were easily saddened, easily angered, easily emotionally moved. But now, if we can remain calm and equanimous before all circumstances, that is a very precious state to have cultivated. To practice and achieve such a state is very valuable. Many worldly people strive their whole lives, yet until the moment of death, they are still full of sorrow, attachment, anger, and hatred. But if we, perhaps in our 30s, 40s, or 50s, can achieve a calm and cool mind, that is a significant accomplishment, a very beautiful result. But it is not the entirety of the path. Remember that. We must go further. It is only a temporary stage, a milestone. That temporary stage in our mind, if we speak of realms of existence, there are various realms one can be reborn into through such practice. Firstly, we are currently in the human realm. Previously, in past lives, we might have been animals or beings in other states. But due to some accumulated merit, we have been reborn as humans. If we know how to practice in this human life, is this human realm a permanently stable realm? No, it is only temporary. At some point, we must die. And the difficulty is this. If we are a person who is not very wealthy by worldly standards, not exceptionally beautiful or powerful, it is often easier for us to see this realm as temporary, because we might hope for another better realm where we might be more beautiful, live more comfortably, or have more opportunities. It's easier to see this current life as a temporary realm under such circumstances. But there are some people who are very wealthy. In the human realm, there are those who are so rich their money seems inexhaustible. They have grand houses, spacious properties, and perhaps many hidden treasures or investments. For such wealthy people, if you tell them that all of this is just temporary, that upon death they must let it all go, they find it very difficult to accept and are often very afraid of death. Because death for them means losing all those possessions they are attached to. They are terrified of this loss. Imagine, if we are not wealthy, and most of us here are probably in that category. But imagine now we have $5 or $10 million or $50 million or however much. If we think of death, are we afraid? Yes, often because death means leaving those millions for others to use, which feels like a great waste or loss from an attached perspective. This is a common psychological state. And when we come to understand the Dharma, the Buddha's teachings, we must strive to overcome this clinging mentality. Everything is just temporary, even if we were as wealthy as the entire earth. This human existence is still just a temporary realm. This is the first thing we must have the courage, the bravery to see and accept. Then, at some point, if we practice very well, if our practice is beautiful, diligent, and precise, when we die, we may be reborn in a heavenly realm. The heavens, or Deva realms, are said to be places that accommodate beings who have cultivated certain qualities. Firstly, those who have developed their spiritual potential and can attain meditative concentration, samadhi, a state of mental stability and clarity. Secondly, those who are compassionate and have helped many people, who have previously cultivated much merit through generosity and assisting others. A combination of these two, meditative development and compassionate action, is often needed to be reborn in a heavenly realm. If one is only one of these, rebirth in a higher heavenly realm is less certain. For example, if one's mind only has concentration but lacks sufficient compassion or accumulated merit from good deeds, rebirth in heaven is not guaranteed, or if it occurs, it might be a less joyful or less refined heavenly realm, perhaps somewhat empty of deeper fulfillment. Or, if one only practices generosity and performs many meritorious deeds but lacks spiritual depth and meditative concentration, one might not necessarily be reborn in a heavenly realm either. One might be reborn in this human realm as a very wealthy and fortunate person. But to be reborn in a higher, more blissful heavenly realm, one generally needs both wisdom often developed through meditation and merit from ethical conduct and generosity. And life in such a heavenly realm is described as being very long and very blissful. Whatever one wishes for, one often obtains. If one wants beautiful clothes of a certain style, they appear instantly according to one's wish. This is sometimes referred to as transformation at will. If one desires anything, one often gets it. If one doesn't like one's dwelling, one can just think of a new one, and it transforms into another dwelling immediately. Here on Earth, we have to save money, apply for building permits, hire contractors, supervise construction. It's all very tiring and complex. But in some heavenly realms, whatever one thinks or wishes for, it manifests accordingly. This is said to be because when we were on Earth in previous lives, whatever people wanted, if we often helped them achieve their legitimate wishes, if we assisted others in fulfilling their needs, then later, when we are reborn in a heavenly realm, we receive the karmic fruit of having our own wishes fulfilled easily. Our wishes come true. However, people who reach a heavenly realm and enjoy such blessings often become complacent. They are content with the realm they are in, so it's difficult for them to feel the urgency to practice further towards ultimate liberation. Therefore, it is said that even in those heavenly realms, bodhisattvas and great spiritual teachers often manifest to organize Dharma teachings and give many lectures to inspire beings there. So, don't think that beings in heavenly realms don't practice. They also can practice and study a great deal. However, in the depths of their hearts, because that realm is so blissful and comfortable, they still can become attached to those pleasant states. As we who know the Buddha Dharma, we must remember, even if a realm is exceedingly blissful, it is still only temporary within the cycle of samsara. Even if there is a realm described, for instance, like the pure land of utmost bliss, Sukhavati, of Amitabha Buddha, a paradise aspired to by many Buddhists, is that realm ultimately temporary in the context of boundless time and ultimate liberation? Yes, from the highest perspective of ultimate, formless Nibbana, even such a blissful realm is considered temporary. We must have the courage to see this truth. That is why in the vows of the Pure Land school of Buddhism, there is often a vow to, after being reborn in the Pure Land and progressing on the path there, eventually return to the Saha world, our world system with all its imperfections, to help liberate other sentient beings. One doesn't just aspire to be reborn in the Pure Land and stay there forever in passive bliss. No, one aspires to be reborn there, study the Dharma, attain a high degree of realization, and then return to the Saha world, to this place of suffering, to guide other sentient beings towards enlightenment. And the ultimate place of realization, Nibbana itself, is a state that is beyond any specific realm, beyond form, beyond characteristics. It is, in a sense, everywhere and nowhere specific. It is not a place with a fixed shape or appearance. Remember, in the scriptures such as the Diamond Sutra, it says, all that has form is illusory and unreal. Does the Pure Land, as described, have form? Yes, it does. It is described as having ground made of gold, vast expanses, beautiful lotus flowers. These are forms. Therefore, from this ultimate perspective, they too are part of conditioned reality, and thus, also temporary in the grand scheme of things. But the true Nibbana realized by the Buddha is formless and markless, unconditioned. Remember that. Therefore, all realms we might attain through our practice, however blissful, we must know they are ultimately only temporary stages on the path, not the final, unconditioned Nibbana itself. If we understand this, our hearts will not become attached to any particular state or achievement. Right in this very life we are living, for example. If we are fortunate enough to practice diligently and attain some realization, if we have a certain level of awakening, our mind brightens, we might experience some degree of supernormal insight. We can see and know certain things more clearly, our mind is very peaceful, we read the scriptures and understand everything profoundly. We can preach the Dharma fluently and endlessly. This could also be called an attainment, a partial realization. It's like reaching different positive states. But it is not permanent in the ultimate sense, not the final, ultimate goal. We must understand that it is also just a temporary stage. If we understand it as temporary, we will strive to practice further, to keep going. We won't stop, become complacent, or boast. There are some who, upon attaining a certain level of insight, their minds become very bright. They can understand many subtle things, gain some unusual abilities, and can enter meditative states with ease. And they might mistakenly think, this is it. I have completed my cultivation. Such a person, in some future life, or even in this life if they become complacent, may regress and lose what they have gained. Perhaps not immediately in this life if their merit is strong, but in a future life, they might regress due to the self-complacency that obstructs further progress and creates negative karmic results. This is a subtle aspect of cause and effect that we must be aware of. Therefore, to see if a person can progress far in their spiritual practice, we can often look at their attitude. Have they become self-satisfied? Are they content with their current level of attainment, thinking there is nothing more to do? If we see they are already self-satisfied, we know this person will likely stop progressing. At some point in some life, they may regress. But if we know someone continues to be humble, discreet in their attainments, diligent, and makes continuous effort, this person has the potential to reach the final Nibbana. In worldly life, it's somewhat similar. For example, if we see a wealthy person and they do not show any signs of complacency and they continue to work ethically and wisely, we know they will likely become even wealthier or maintain their wealth responsibly. Or if we see someone become wealthy and then they start to act arrogantly and rest on their laurels, we know they might not become much wealthier and may even gradually decline. And their descendants later might also suffer a decline, partly due to the arrogant attitude associated with that wealth, which can lead to unskillful actions. Conversely, if we see someone who is already wealthy but remains modest, humble, gentle, and respects others. We know this person has a good foundation and may continue to prosper or use their wealth wisely. If we meet such people, we might try to learn from their positive qualities. So, not being self-satisfied is a sign that we can still progress. We tell each other this so that each person will always examine their own mind to see if they have become complacent regarding their worldly or spiritual merits, their state of mind, their study and practice, and even their spiritual realizations. Be careful. One should strive to never become complacent on the path. We go through these stages then, which are like the apparition cities for a Buddhist practitioner. For one who takes refuge in the Buddha and practices, these are the steps we reach. Firstly, we attain a more comfortable, easier life. That is the first apparition city, the first milestone. After practicing for some time, our life becomes more pleasant and at ease. This is a very important initial attainment. If we haven't achieved this, we haven't really reached even the first significant stage of benefit from practice. So, the initial results of spiritual practice must manifest not only in our inner state but also in our daily life, in our wholesome actions and improved conditions. If one practices correctly and cultivates merit properly, one will see their life become more comfortable. No longer constantly worried about basic necessities like food and clothing. This is an initial result that must be passed through. One cannot realistically have a situation where someone sits with legs crossed in deep meditation, claiming great spiritual states, while their spouse and children are starving and don't know what they will eat that evening. That scenario is generally not how true, balanced spiritual progress unfolds. A reasonable degree of economic stability and a comfortable mind are usually necessary to progress deeply in meditation and wisdom. Therefore, the first apparition city, the first tangible result, is still often a more comfortable and stable life. If anyone finds their life is not yet comfortable enough to practice with a peaceful mind, they may need to adjust their practice or their worldly efforts to create more stability. One might accept that this takes 5 or 10 years of effort, but this stage of relative stability should ideally be passed through. That is a practical necessity for many. The second apparition city, or milestone, is a stronger, more stable moral character. This means our moral foundation becomes very firm, very solid. Previously, we might have been quick to anger, perhaps blurting out unkind words without thinking. But later, as our practice deepens, our mind becomes very peaceful. We are patient, we cultivate love for others, we forgive more readily the faults of others. We are not overly critical or judgmental. If we are too harsh and critical about the faults of others, it often means our own morality and understanding are not yet well developed. And towards those who suffer, we become more generous in helping with an open heart. This indicates a very clear and solid morality. No one can easily sway us from our ethical principles anymore. If we are living altruistically, with a genuine desire to benefit others, no one can come and say this or that to persuade us to become selfish again. For example, if we want to help someone in a very legitimate and wholesome way, and someone else comes and tries to dissuade us, saying things like, "What's the use of helping? How much is enough?" It's like a drop in the ocean. The suffering in this world is endless. So why bother helping? If such words cause us to waver and give up our good intentions, it means our moral conviction is not yet truly firm. But if our moral resolve is strong, that is the second sign of progress. And living morally like that, if for a lifetime one lives with high ethical standards, one would naturally be hesitant to accept, for instance, a sum of money if one suspects it is ill-gotten. One would rather continue driving an old, dilapidated car or live simply than accept money of dubious origin. A person like that has great inner strength and accumulates great merit because a life of morality has powerful positive results, almost like a miracle in how it transforms one's destiny. This is also the second major result. For a person who practices correctly, we do not accept that someone who has understood the Buddha's teachings and practiced for a long time can be seriously lacking in morality. If they are, they have likely practiced incorrectly or misunderstood the core principles. Practicing incorrectly or with wrong view can lead to a lack of true morality, which then can lead to negative states like jealousy, envy, selfishness, and conflict. The fundamental sign of a person practicing correctly in Buddhism is that they must have genuine morality, and that morality must be strong, firm, and based on wisdom and compassion. Another third apparition city, or milestone, is a pure and tranquil mind. This means one practices until good results are achieved, and the mind becomes very pure and tranquil. This tranquility, we are not yet speaking of entering deep states of meditative absorption, jhana. But in daily life, the mind is consistently clear, bright, and gentle. This tranquility, in Buddhist terms, is often associated with right mindfulness and clear comprehension, sati sampajana in Pali. This is the seventh factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, which we will discuss in a future session on the path itself. It means that from moment to moment we clearly see our own mind. As soon as a thought or mental state arises, we know it immediately. Even subtle thoughts, just as they are beginning to form, like faint ripples in the mind, we see them. Therefore, the mind is always kept in a state of relative tranquility and clarity. These are the third kind of results. This is the third milestone in the Buddhist path, the third stage we reach. If, for example, in our daily life we are often forgetful, or frequently prone to distracting discursive thoughts that carry us away, we know we haven't yet fully achieved this third result. We might have morality, but if discursive thoughts often lead us astray, that's not yet the full attainment of this third stage. The third result is having a significant degree of control over one's mind, keeping the mind generally very gentle, serene, and aware. The fourth result, or milestone, can be the attainment of meditative absorption, jhana or samadhi. This is like the great Zen masters, the arahants, and other advanced meditators. They can enter states of deep meditative absorption for very long periods, many hours, or even many days. This indicates a very high level of mental cultivation. The fifth result is wisdom, panna in Pali, prajna in Sanskrit. True wisdom means one understands the deepest principles of the Dharma, the ultimate nature of reality. At the same time, one may also come to know many subtle things about the universe, about the nature of human life, and the laws of cause and effect. As we mentioned earlier, this can include abilities like knowing others' minds to some extent, perceiving other realms of existence, seeing clearly the cause and effect in the lives of sentient beings, similar to abilities sometimes described as clairvoyance, clairaudience, and other supernormal powers. That is a manifestation of profound wisdom. For example, the supernormal power of iti, which can include things like flying, walking on water, creating transformations, is said to truly belong to those who have penetrated the principle of emptiness, sanatta in Pali, sunyata in Sanskrit. The understanding that all phenomena are empty of inherent, independent existence. Why? That's right, because a bodhisattva, a being dedicated to enlightenment for the sake of all beings, having passed through the profound understanding of emptiness, acts without perceiving themselves as a separate actor or clinging to the act or its results. Currently, when most of us act, we are very aware of ourselves acting. We remember clearly that we gave so much money that day, and we might even mentally calculate how much merit we expect. We are very precise because we hope for a good karmic return, perhaps so that in a future life we can be wealthy or fortunate. That is the way an ordinary person, puthajana in Pali, still bound by ego, typically acts even when doing good deeds. But a bodhisattva acts truly out of boundless love and compassion for all sentient beings, and because they see the ultimate emptiness, the lack of inherent self-existence in all things, including themselves and their actions. Yet, paradoxically, they still strive with great energy to do all good and beautiful things for the world. This is called the bodhisattva's practice, the bodhisattva's great conduct, mahakariya. We might call it Buddha work, Fat Su, for ease of understanding. It's called the great conduct of a bodhisattva because they act without attachment to the idea of an actor, an action, or a recipient of the action, all grounded in their wisdom of emptiness and their profound compassion. Now, let's briefly discuss the fruits of sainthood, the stages of enlightenment, according to the Buddha's teachings. There are traditionally described 4 stages of sainthood for those on the path of the arahant, a fully liberated being. First is the stream enterer, sotapanna. Second is the once-returner, sakadagami. Third is the non-returner, anagami. Fourth is the arahant. This topic of the specific stages of cessation of Nibbana is quite advanced, quite profound. It might make you sleepy if I go into too much technical detail. If I just talk at length about these very high states, you might all fall asleep before I finish. The stream enterer, sotapanna, is the first stage of sainthood. Such a person still looks very ordinary from the outside. We wouldn't necessarily know they have reached this stage just by looking at them. However, there are some key characteristics. One is that person will never again be reborn in the lower realms of suffering, that is, the animal realm, the realm of hungry ghosts, or the hell realms. That's the first definite outcome. Secondly, that person will only be reborn in either the human realm or a heavenly realm for a maximum of 7 more lifetimes before attaining full enlightenment. Thirdly, that person will one day certainly attain full enlightenment, Nibbana. We don't know exactly when within those subsequent lives. It might not be precisely 7. It could be fewer, but they will definitely attain full enlightenment. These are 3 results that a stream enterer achieves. First, never again falling into the realms of animals, hungry ghosts, or hells. Second, they only continue to exist if reborn in human or heavenly forms. Third, they will one day achieve Nibbana, it's certain. If we haven't yet become a stream enterer, we are not certain that we will ever attain enlightenment in a future life. The cause and effect for that ultimate attainment are not yet irreversibly fixed. But once one becomes a stream enterer, one will one day achieve enlightenment. A stream enterer, for example, could they still commit a very grave offense? Could they accidentally commit a serious wrong? Yes. The teachings suggest they still could, though it would be out of character and due to strong residual karmic traces or momentary heedlessness, not from a deeply malicious intent. Don't think that a stream enterer is completely perfect in all conduct. A stream enterer can still make mistakes or act unskillfully at times, but they will never be reborn in the lower realms as a result. They will only pay for it if necessary in a subsequent human life, perhaps as a very suffering human being. But they won't fall into realms of extreme torment like hell. They might experience extreme hardship in a human life to repay that past unskillful deed. If another person, not a stream enterer, committed the same offense, they might fall into an animal realm or a hell realm immediately. But the stream enterer who commits a similar offense, if it were to happen, does not fall to those lower realms. They repay it if necessary in a human life. So, if anyone finds themselves experiencing extreme and seemingly undeserved suffering, perhaps, just perhaps, you've already become a stream enterer in a past life and are now clearing some old karmic debts in this human realm. You're not going down to hell but are repaying it up here. Sometimes we complain, "Oh, life is so hard. It's like hell." Well, maybe you're already a stream enterer, repaying your karma in the human realm. Are there any such people here? Perhaps many, it seems, if we consider the vastness of past lives. But there's more to being a stream enterer. Another characteristic is, as the Buddha implied, they do not have a closed fist like a teacher who selfishly holds back some essential teachings. What does this mean more broadly? It means that person lives very well with everyone very openly, honestly and generously. You have to add that quality to be considered a stream enterer. Just experiencing suffering is not enough. Suffering alone doesn't make you a stream enterer. But if you also live very kindly and ethically with everyone, then perhaps, hopefully, you are on the path of a stream enterer or have attained that stage. Anyone like that? Quite a few. Not a small number, I hope. And there's another crucial thing. That person has a strange, unshakable faith, a deep confidence in the Buddha, the Dharma, his teachings, and the Sangha, the community of noble ones. Their confidence is firm and cannot be swayed by others. That is a key sign of a stream enterer. If, for example, our faith in the Dharma is wavering, and if someone says something negative or tries to convert us to another path and we immediately switch our views or lose our conviction, then we are not yet a stream enterer. A stream enterer no longer has any fundamental doubt or hesitation regarding the core truths of the path. They have a peculiar determination, a steadfastness to uphold the Dharma, sometimes described as being willing to die rather than abandon the essential Dharma. That is a sign of a stream enterer. For example, if someone put a sword to your neck and told you to abandon the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, a stream enterer would inwardly just say, "Go ahead, cut." They remain steadfast. Or if someone offered you a lot of money saying, "Abandon Buddhism, come to our religion, and we'll give you this much," and you refuse, you wouldn't trade your faith, your conviction, for material wealth or worldly gain. That is a sign of a true stream enterer. Is anyone here like that? Or if offered 10 million, would you perhaps say, "Make it 11 million and I'll consider it"? Hopefully, most people here would value the Dharma far above mere money. As for the second stage of sainthood, the once-returner Sakadagami, the scriptures say their greed, aversion, and delusion are very slight, very subtle. Hearing this is quite remarkable, isn't it? We hear that even a saint at this stage still has some subtle traces of greed and aversion, albeit very little. And we might think that even a stream enterer, as we just discussed, already has an open, non-grasping hand and a great deal of faith. The characteristics of these stages of sainthood are detailed in Buddhist discourses, such as the one on the 10 fetters, sayajana, which are mental defilements that are overcome at each stage. Please try to study that discourse carefully for a fuller understanding. Because in this talk on the truth of cessation, I cannot cover all these details exhaustively. But in a talk specifically on the 10 fetters, I would analyze these stages of sainthood in Buddhism more thoroughly. There are also levels of meditative attainment known as jhanas in Pali, which are states of deep mental concentration. There are 4 fine material jhanas, from the first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, to the fourth jhana. And then there are 4 immaterial or formless attainments, arupa jhanas, the sphere of infinite space, the sphere of infinite consciousness, the sphere of nothingness, and the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. And finally, there is the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, Nirodha Sacca, a very profound state accessible only to non-returners and arahants with mastery of all preceding jhanas. Many people wonder if attaining sainthood and attaining jhana are related, if they are completely the same or similar. Attaining sainthood, the stages like stream enterer, etc., and attaining jhana are different, though related, they are not the same thing at all. The freedom from certain mental hindrances experienced by someone who has attained the first jhana might be greater in some respects than that of a stream enterer who has not developed jhana, particularly in terms of temporary mental stillness. Someone who has attained the second jhana might have a level of mental calm roughly comparable in some ways to a once-returner who also has developed concentration. The third jhana might be compared to a non-returner in terms of bliss and equanimity, and the fourth jhana, with its profound purity of mindfulness and equanimity, is often a basis for the wisdom that leads to arahantship. But in the initial stages, meditative attainment, jhana, and the path to sainthood can seem like distinct, though often parallel, tracks. Sainthood primarily follows the path of developing morality, sila, concentration, samadhi, and wisdom, panna. Meditative attainment, jhana, focuses specifically on the depth and quality of mental concentration. If one's concentration is deep, the Buddha classifies one into a certain level of jhana. If it's deeper, a higher jhana. Whereas sainthood is assessed according to the development of wisdom that eradicates defilements and understands the 4 noble truths. If one's morality and wisdom are profound, one is a higher saint. If they are less developed, one is a lower saint or not yet a saint. Therefore, we must cultivate both. Why? Because meditative concentration supports the development of morality and wisdom. It is thanks to achieving deep concentration that we can gain the stability of mind necessary for profound wisdom and unshakable morality. Without sufficient meditative concentration, it is very difficult to achieve deep and transformative morality and wisdom. For example, we say that for a once-returner, greed, aversion, and delusion are subtle. Now, perhaps we are someone who likes to do good deeds, help this temple, make offerings to that monastery. We like to provide disaster relief for the poor, support impoverished students. We love to do meritorious deeds. Our heart is good, isn't it? Yes, it's good. But do we always have enough money to do all that? Not always. So we might have to fundraise, right? We have to solicit donations, campaign for support. So, in our head, we might be always thinking about money, even if for a good cause. It's a strange contradiction. Someone else might not care about doing good deeds and is always busy getting rich and taking care of themselves. Their head is also always full of thoughts about money. We, who are so good and always doing meritorious deeds, might also find our heads full of thoughts about money. It can seem the same on the surface, but it is precisely through meditative concentration that we can avoid being consumed by these thoughts in the same way and gain insight into their nature. If we don't have meditative concentration, things will be different. How so? Gradually, as we keep seeking money, seeking donations, even for good causes, we can fall into a kind of attachment or even obsession with money, almost like a habit. We might even, in extreme cases, consider resorting to unskillful means to get money to do good deeds. If our wisdom is not strong, it can happen. Sometimes we might rationalize, oh, just a little white lie or a slight exaggeration to get money for these meritorious acts. That is still a form of attachment rooted in the ordinary, unenlightened mind, not the balanced action of a developing saint. But through meditative concentration, we can gain the clarity to see this. So, when our mind is deeply concentrated, we discover, this constant thinking about money, even for good, is starting to become a habit. Starting to become a subtle form of craving or attachment. We must learn to let go of that clinging. We must act with generosity, but act as if not clinging to the outcome. Doing what we can according to conditions, not constantly running around in an agitated state trying to find money, begging here and there to do good deeds. So, it is due to meditative concentration that we can achieve a more profound and balanced morality. It's the same with aversion or anger. It is thanks to meditative concentration that we can discover the subtle irritations and resentments remaining in our hearts. We may know that we no longer have coarse anger, or manifest outright fierceness or even overt irritation easily. The worst form of aversion is malice. A less intense form is fierceness or aggression. Lower still is overt anger when provoked. And even lower, more subtle, is irritability or annoyance. Through meditative concentration, we can see step by step how our mind gets heated, how these states arise. We must strive to abandon all of them to eradicate them from the root. Malice should be left at the very gate when one metaphorically enters the temple of practice. Fierceness should be dropped right at the temple door. Gradually, overt anger also subsides, though it might still arise sometimes when interacting with fellow practitioners or facing difficult situations. But after practicing meditation for some time, even that is largely abandoned. Irritability, however, that subtle undercurrent of annoyance, often takes a longer time to overcome. Our concentration needs to be somewhat developed to even notice and begin to work with it. And when our concentration is deeper and our morality and wisdom increase, then we can begin to abandon even these subtle forms of inner disturbance. Only then can we truly practice the great conduct of a bodhisattva, which is free from such afflictions. It is thanks to meditative concentration that our morality and wisdom are truly purified and grow strong. Therefore, anyone who practices the Buddhist path correctly must cultivate both meditative concentration, samadhi, and morality/wisdom, silapanna. If a person only cultivates meditative concentration to achieve jhanic states but neglects morality and wisdom, they will never attain true sainthood in Buddhism. They might attain jhanas, become a powerful master of concentration, perhaps even develop some psychic powers like a sorcerer. But not a holy being in the Buddhist sense. They must have genuine morality grounded in wisdom. They must cultivate virtue. While sitting in meditation, they must always be examining their mind for right and wrong, for wholesome and unwholesome states with wisdom. Only then can they truly be a saint in the Buddhist tradition. And if one says they will only try to cultivate morality without practicing meditation or developing concentration, what then? Morality will not be deeply perfected. Because without deep concentration, we often lack the clarity and strength to overcome subtle defilements and truly perfect the moral qualities within our minds. True, unshakable morality is achieved through a calm, concentrated, and wise mind. The deeper the mind's concentration and the brighter the wisdom, the more luminous and steadfast morality becomes. Remember, these two aspects are like two wings of a bird. Both are needed to fly. In the development of meditative concentration, leading to the jhanas, we have several stages. The first stage, often emphasized as a foundation, is right mindfulness and clear comprehension, sati sampajana. At this stage, the mind is very clear, bright, and spacious. As soon as a discursive thought or unwholesome mental state just begins to arise, even a tiny flicker, it is known immediately. A thought, before it even forms into words, just a subtle stirring for a fraction of a second, is seen and let go without being carried away by it. That is the practice of right mindfulness and clear comprehension. In the first jhana, the mind automatically stays in concentration accompanied by certain joyful factors. We don't have to exert constant forceful effort to suppress hindrances anymore. Thoughts might still arise and pass away at the periphery, but the mind naturally remains in a state of unified concentration on the meditation object. In the second jhana, discursive thought, initial and sustained application of mind completely ceases. But the joyful factors and unified knowing awareness remain even stronger. At this point, Some subtle supernormal abilities or insights may begin to appear. This stage of profound inner collectedness is sometimes poetically compared to the seventh picture in the traditional 10 ox-herding pictures, which depict the path to enlightenment. In the third jhana, the coarser forms of joy fade, replaced by a more subtle bliss and profound equanimity. The person begins to have access to more significant supernormal powers and enters more deeply into the understanding of the normally unconscious layers of the mind. They experience great bliss and clarity and may be able to perceive subtle realms or communicate with deities or celestial beings. Space and time may be experienced differently. They no longer seem so vast or distant in the conventional sense. For one who attains the third jhana, space and time can seem to draw much closer or be transcended in certain ways. This is sometimes compared to the eighth ox-herding picture. The fourth jhana is called purity of mindfulness due to equanimity, upekasati parasati. In this state, there is neither pain nor pleasure, neither sadness nor elation. All such dualistic feelings have ceased. Even the subtle bliss of the third jhana is transcended, leading to a state of profound, unshakable equanimity and utter purity of mindfulness. From this very stable and pure state, profound wisdom can arise, leading to the full realization of the three clear knowledges: knowledge of past lives, knowledge of the arising and passing of beings according to their karma, and knowledge of the destruction of the mental defilements and the 6 supernormal powers. This is the attainment of arahantship. These levels of meditative attainment, I don't have time to discuss them in great detail today. Really, when speaking of the truth of cessation and the path to it, these meditative states should be explained thoroughly. But it's very specialized and you might easily fall asleep if I go into too much technical detail. If I started detailing all the factors of the fourth jhana, everyone down there might be in the sleep jhana before I finished. So, because it's too technical for a general audience, I won't go into it further now. Only for someone who has practiced meditation extensively and has some direct experience would a detailed analysis of these points be very interesting and engaging. Someone who has experience in jhana practice, when each point of the different jhanas is explained, they can compare it with their own inner experience. What is the second jhana like from my experience? What about the third? Which of these points have I reached? Which have I not yet reached? It's very fascinating and helpful for them. But for most of us here today, many may not have yet practiced jhana to this depth, so I won't say much more on this specific topic. There is just one rather sad thing to observe in the history of our Buddhism. It seems that the further we are in time from the Buddha's actual presence in the world, the more the manifest attainments of people tend to diminish. This is what is often referred to in Buddhist tradition as the degenerate age of the Dharma, or Mappo in Japanese. Mofa in Chinese, referring to the latter days of the Dharma when genuine practice and realization become more difficult. During the true Dharma period, shortly after the Buddha's passing, and especially during his lifetime, many people attained arahantship. The conditions were ripe and the Buddha's direct guidance was available. Then, after the Buddha's parinibbana, his final passing away, as time went on, the number of those attaining arahantship gradually decreased. There were fewer and fewer arahants. Later, there were great Zen masters and other accomplished practitioners, those who had profound and unique awakenings but were perhaps not yet full arahants in the classical sense. Some had supernormal powers and outstanding insight, but they might not have had the full 6 supernormal powers as completely developed as a classical arahant. Because a special characteristic of an arahant is said to be the ability to know their own immeasurable past lives and the immeasurable past lives of others. If they want to know their past lives, they enter deep concentration and they can know everything, where they lived in countless past eons, where they were born, what significant deeds they performed, everything. Or if they want to know about someone else, they can enter concentration, observe with their supernormal vision, and know all the countless past lives of that other person, where they were born, what significant actions they did, their karmic tendencies, their names and past lives, and so on. Later Zen masters and other meditation masters generally did not emphasize or necessarily manifest these specific abilities to the same extent as the early arahants. That was a period when, being further from the Buddha in time, manifest attainments gradually diminished. Then, later still, even that level of profound experiential realization became less common. People might then only achieve a high degree of right mindfulness and clear comprehension, a very clear and bright state of mind, and consider that to be sainthood or enlightenment. But in reality, While extremely valuable, it's just a very high level of right mindfulness and clear comprehension, not necessarily full Nibbana. Then, later still, even that consistent clarity might be lost. And people might come to regard the Buddha's teachings primarily as a philosophical system, a matter of intellectual reasoning and debate. Whoever can reason well and articulate complex philosophical points is then considered accomplished, perhaps even regarded as a type of saint by some. In truth, at that stage, genuine deep realization might be rare. At that point, people's understanding of the Buddha can become very shallow. They might see the Buddha merely as a human philosopher who sat under the Bodhi tree, thought about this and that philosophical problem, and then taught certain tenets based on his reasoning. They don't understand the Buddha's profound, direct, super-mundane realization. They imagine the Buddha to be much like themselves, just an ordinary but very intelligent philosopher who sat for 49 days under the Bodhi tree, perhaps without food or drink, just thinking deeply about various things, then got up and started talking. To understand the Buddha in such a limited, mundane way is truly pitiful. And to misrepresent the Buddha and his teachings in this way can incur very heavy negative karma for oneself. And it causes the perceived value and transformative power of the Buddha's teachings to diminish progressively in the world. So, this is where we see that the Buddha spoke very accurately about the potential decline of the Dharma over long periods. The further from him in time, the more people's actual spiritual attainments might lessen. And when it lessens to the point where practitioners are primarily mere dry logicians or scholars without deep meditative experience, then the living heart of the Dharma is almost lost. Today, we understand this historical perspective not to be discouraged, but so that we can be determined to practice diligently and strive to regain true realization, true concentration, and true wisdom. We shouldn't let our understanding of Buddhism be merely intellectual or linguistic. That would be a great waste of this precious opportunity. We must strive to understand the Buddha's teaching with a truly pure and tranquil mind, developed through ethical conduct and meditation. We must strive to practice meditation earnestly to, step by step, achieve real, deep concentration and liberating insight. When we speak of individual karmic conditions and cases of enlightenment in ancient times, there's a well-known instance from the scriptures. Once, when the Buddha was on an alms round, a certain ascetic from another religious tradition came and knelt at the Buddha's feet, earnestly asking to be taught the Dharma, asking to learn. It is said that this ascetic, named Bhaiya of the Barcloth, had a special karmic connection from past lives that was ripening. The first time he asked, the Buddha, knowing the time was not yet perfectly right for Bhaiya's mind, remained silent or gently refused. Perhaps to test his sincerity and to allow his resolve and mental preparedness to deepen. We see that some great spiritual teachers sometimes refuse an initial request for teaching, not out of unkindness, but to push the student to make them truly determined and to ensure their mind is receptive. So, this ascetic, Bhaiya, kept following the Buddha, almost clinging to his feet, begging the Buddha to teach him just one essential sentence of Dharma. Finally, when the Buddha saw with his wisdom that Bhaiya's mind was fully ripe and open, the Buddha taught him a very profound and concise principle. He said to Bhaiya, and this is a paraphrase from the scriptures, "Bhaiya, you should train yourself thus. In the seen, let there be only the seen. In the heard, let there be only the heard. In the sensed, let there be only the sensed. In the cognized, let there be only the cognized. That is how you should train yourself, Bhaiya. When for you there is in the seen only the seen, then, Bhaiya, you will not be by that, and when you are not by that, you will not be in that. And when you are not in that, then, Bhaiya, you will be neither here nor beyond nor in between the two. This itself is the end of suffering." Upon hearing this, Bhaiya is said to have attained enlightenment, arahantship, that very day. He had already ripened through his previous efforts. Had we been there and heard the same words, would we have become enlightened? Probably not. So, there are very profound statements that we can hear but not realize the full depth of, because our minds are still too far from that level of understanding and purity. But Bhaiya was already very close, very near to awakening. The Buddha said just a little and he arrived, he realized. That's how it is for some. So, when we hear of someone attaining enlightenment upon hearing a single sentence, it's because their mind was already at that crucial point of ripeness, prepared by extensive practice in previous lives or earlier in that life. One sentence and they arrived. As for us, we may feel we are still very far from that state. And why might we feel so far? Often, it's because so many worldly things pull at us, distract us, and create agitation in our minds. For example, just getting overly excited or distressed about a major public event like the World Cup football tournament can be enough to throw our minds into a state of turmoil and distraction from the path. It is said that shortly after Buddha heard that teaching and attained enlightenment, he went out to find robes as he wished to be ordained as a monk by the Buddha, but was tragically gored to death by a cow. In India at that time, cows often roamed freely everywhere. They weren't typically killed for food by the general populace, and in fact, cows were often revered, so no one dared to harm them. Unexpectedly, he encountered a fierce cow and was killed. The monks later asked the Buddha about Buddha. He met the Buddha, heard one sentence, realized the way, and then died so suddenly. What is the karmic background to this? The Buddha explained that Buddha, in a very distant past life, had committed a serious unwholesome action. In one version of the story, he had callously denied help to a past Buddha or an arahant, or had stolen something precious like a golden stupa. Such was his residual karma ripening. If it were us observing such an event without understanding karma, we might draw all sorts of wrong conclusions. So this is something we should remember. In this life, there are things our eyes see very clearly, yet our interpretation of them may not be the truth. What our eyes see is not necessarily the complete or accurate picture. For example, if we see someone run towards a hut, and then we go to that hut and see gold and silver there, we might immediately conclude that person is a thief caught red-handed. What else could it be, we might think. But remember, in this life, things we hear are not necessarily true, and things we see with our physical eyes are not necessarily the whole truth either. That's why a wise person once said something to the effect of, "Believe half of what you see and none of what you hear unless you have carefully verified it." People with a lifetime of experience are often forced to say such things due to many deceptions and misunderstandings. But sometimes we Buddhists and people in general can be very gullible. As soon as they hear something, especially gossip, they tend to believe it. If they hear someone speak ill of another person, they might believe it immediately. Sometimes, even if it's their own respected teacher whom they revere, if they hear someone else speak ill of that teacher, they might believe the slander right away and perhaps even write an angry letter or lose faith. This happens all the time. Disciples sometimes don't understand their teacher or the complexities of a situation. They hear gossip and believe it without investigation. That's a common human weakness. So, with Buddha's story, the karmic background was complex. There's another story, perhaps from a different tradition or a Jataka tale, a story of the Buddha's previous lives. That illustrates a similar point about not judging by appearances and the ripening of karma. It tells of a virtuous person who was wrongly accused of a crime, say theft. What was this person's attitude then? Did he vehemently deny it? If he had, he might have sworn by heaven and earth, "I would never touch such a thing. If I did, may I be struck by lightning and die." But this particular virtuous person in that story remained calm and didn't argue excessively. Perhaps their face turned ashen with the shock of the false accusation. But they accepted the unfolding of events with a degree of resignation, knowing that some past karma might be at play. So he was arrested and sentenced. The justice system in ancient times, as now, could sometimes be harsh or mistaken. This case must have seemed serious to the authorities. They tied him up in the execution ground, preparing to kill him. At that moment, when he was bound and perhaps battered, tied to a post in the yard, about to be beheaded, the Buddha, or a bodhisattva figure in some stories, appeared. The Buddha, with his wisdom, knew this person's karma was ripening and that this was a crucial juncture. When we are paying for our heavy past karma, even a Buddha cannot simply wave it away without the conditions being right. Everyone in this world must experience the results of their past actions. So we shouldn't always blame heaven or earth, saying, "Why is my life so hard?" Aren't the gods or Buddhas listening or helping? Perhaps we have to endure certain suffering to exhaust our negative karma. At that moment, when this virtuous person's negative karma was nearly exhausted by this ordeal, the Buddha appeared. He might have used his supernormal powers. He didn't necessarily walk there. He could have manifested in the sky right before the accused person. As he manifested, he preached a sermon, perhaps on patience, forbearance, the nature of karma, and the principle of impermanence. As soon as the Buddha finished reciting a verse, it is said that this person, with their mind purified by suffering and uplifted by the Dharma, attained a high stage of enlightenment. perhaps even arahantship right there. And once they attained enlightenment, could the ropes still bind them in the same way? No. Though previously tied to a post, they might have levitated into the air, or the ropes might have miraculously fallen away. They manifested supernormal powers or a profound spiritual radiance. At that point, the officials and onlookers would have been terrified and awestruck and would have had to kneel down. They wouldn't dare execute him anymore. He then might have flown back to the Sangha, the monastic community, and lived as an arahant, a normal monk in the community again, but now fully liberated. But his path to enlightenment involved such a dramatic paying of a karmic debt, such as karma. Even in those ancient times with the Buddha present to appear and recite a verse that could trigger enlightenment, such trials were faced by some. In our time, without the living Buddha physically present, we must be prepared for difficulties and strive even harder with our own efforts. It's not always easy. In the Zen Chan tradition of Buddhism, it's similar in that enlightenment can come in unexpected ways, though perhaps the outward dramas are different. In later Zen, the directness of the encounters might not always appear the same as in the earliest Buddhist times, but there are still very remarkable and sometimes strange cases of enlightenment. Perhaps most famous in Zen lore is the kick of Master Mazu Daoyi, which is said to have awakened one of his disciples. This story is often retold in Zen circles. When a monk named Shui Lao, sometimes identified as Bai Zhang Huaihai, though stories vary, first came to see Master Mazu, he asked about the essential meaning of the Buddha Dharma. Mazu, according to one version of the story, said something like, "Come closer, and I'll tell you." Why did he say that? So he could tell him, or so it seemed. When Shui Lao came close, within range of Mazu's foot, Mazu then, instead of answering verbally, simply kicked him forcefully in the chest. It seems Mazu also knew something of Shaolin martial arts, or at least was physically robust. In ancient times, many Zen masters were indeed very skilled in martial arts or had great physical and internal energy. When you read about Zen monastic life, martial arts or physical training were sometimes part of it for discipline and health. So we should remember that Zen masters were often very skilled individuals. So when Shui Lao came within range, Mazu delivered this powerful kick. Shui Lao was knocked to the ground, and in that very moment of shock and pain, he is said to have had a great awakening, a profound enlightenment. That is a very special case, perhaps one of the most striking and unconventional enlightenment stories in Zen history. It is sometimes said to correspond to a prophetic saying attributed to Bodhidharma, the first patriarch of Zen in China, later, from under my lineage. A swift horse will appear and trample people to death all under heaven. This is a metaphorical way of saying that a great master, Mazu, whose name means horse ancestor, will awaken many people through very direct and shocking methods. Mazu did indeed help many people attain enlightenment, and his teaching methods were often very direct, unconventional, and unique. He became renowned in Zen history for his kick and his shout. Now, how do we understand what was in that kick that made the person awaken? Does anyone here understand the deep Zen meaning of that? If you raise your hand, it means you understand. And if you truly understand, perhaps you could also use such methods like Mazu. Actually, the meaning behind such Zen encounters can often be explained to some extent with reason and language, though the explanation is not the experience itself. Can be explained with language. But even if it is explained intellectually, we still wouldn't attain enlightenment just from the explanation. So, perhaps it's better to leave it unexplained for now, to let it be a koan, a spiritual riddle. Let that question, that doubt, that not knowing remain in our hearts. One day, perhaps if someone metaphorically kicks us with a profound teaching or life experience, we might awaken and understand. So, from now on, if you are walking on the road and see someone who looks like a Zen master about to kick you, perhaps you should get closer. Maybe you'll get enlightened. That last part is, of course, a joke to lighten the mood, not literal advice. A second famous case from Zen history is the enlightenment story of Master Linji Ishuan, Rinzai Jaijin in Japanese. His path to enlightenment was also very special and instructive. When he was a young monk in the assembly under his teacher, Master Huangbo Shiyun, Obaka Kaiun in Japanese, his appearance was said to be extraordinary and his virtue and dedication were remarkable. The head monk of the assembly at that time, Muzhou Daoming, also a Chan master Chen Zunsu, saw Linji and knew this was a special person with great potential. He told Linji to go and ask the abbot. Huangbua about the essential meaning of the Buddha Dharma, perhaps saying something like, "This novice will be a great teacher for the world later on." Huangbua, upon hearing this initial praise, or perhaps when Linji first approached, just smiled or didn't engage him directly. Seeing this, Muzhou encouraged Linji again. "Why don't you go and ask the Venerable Abbot something specific about the Dharma?" Linji replied, "I don't know what to ask." Why did he say that? It said that because his personal practice was already very advanced for a young monk. When he sat in meditation, his mind was very empty and peaceful. He had no pressing intellectual doubts or questions about anything at that moment. He was in a state of simple presence and peace. So he felt he had no specific questions to ask. Muzhou then suggested, "Well, just go and ask something fundamental like, what is the truly essential meaning of the Buddha Dharma?" Linji listened and agreed. He properly robed himself and went respectfully to Master Huangbua. "Venerable Abbot," he asked, "may I ask, what is the truly essential meaning of the Buddha Dharma?" Huangbua, without saying a word, just picked up his staff and hit Linji a number of blows. Linji went out, presumably confused. "If it were us, we'd probably go out and complain to Muzhou, you told me to ask. And all I got was a beating." Linji went back twice more at Muzhou's urging, asked the same question, and got hit by Huangbua twice more, for a total of 3 times asking and 3 times being hit with the staff. He still didn't understand anything from this. He started to wonder, this is very strange. What did I do wrong? I asked politely and sincerely. He became very confused, sad, and disheartened by this apparent rejection. At this point of deep confusion, doubt, and sadness, he decided to leave the monastery, feeling he was not making any progress. When he went to bid farewell to Huangbua, Huangbua, instead of letting him go adrift, compassionately told him to go and see another great Zen master, Dayu, who lived some distance away. When Linji went to Master Dayu and recounted his entire story, how he had asked about the Dharma respectfully 3 times and had only gotten hit by Huangbua each time, without any explanation, Master Dayu, upon hearing this, exclaimed with great feeling, "Oh, Huangbua was so extraordinarily kind and compassionate to you, treating you with such directness like a doting grandmother trying to wake up her beloved grandchild. And yet you come here asking if you did anything wrong or if he was mistaken." At that very moment, upon hearing Master Dayu's words, Linji had a great and profound awakening. He instantly understood the deep compassion and skillful means behind Huanggua's seemingly harsh actions. He realized that Huanggua's blows were not punishments but were direct, non-conceptual pointings to his own true nature intended to break through his subtle intellectual and spiritual attachments. He had to go through these very challenging circumstances, this great doubt, to ripen for this breakthrough. There are also stories of practitioners who go through extreme physical hardships in their quest for enlightenment. For example, the famous Tibetan yogi Milarepa. There were times when he had almost nothing to eat or drink, not even enough clothes to wear to protect himself from the harsh Himalayan weather. At one point, it said he only had wild nettles to eat, which turned his skin green, and only a thin cotton cloth to wear. His sister came to visit him in his remote mountain cave and was so saddened by his emaciated and ascetic appearance. His former fiancée also came to visit him once and then, out of compassion, left to weave some cloth for him. She managed to weave enough for a simple loincloth. His dedication to practice under such extreme conditions was extraordinary. There were times he meditated for long periods in the snows of the high Tibetan mountains, and the deep snow would completely cover him. The internal heat generated by his meditation practice, a practice known as tummo, would melt the snow around his body. It's even said that the moisture from his body would rise as steam and then freeze on the snow above him, forming a kind of ice cave. His meditative power, his internal energy under such conditions, was considered extraordinary. He witnessed how some wild animals, during the extreme cold of winter, would hide in caves. But sometimes the cold would penetrate even those caves so intensely that the animals couldn't bear it and would run out in desperation. As soon as they ran out of the relative shelter of the cave into the biting wind, they would sometimes freeze solid almost instantly and fall like stones. That's how intensely cold those high mountain winters could be. Yet, in that same freezing cold, Milarepa sat peacefully in meditation, wrapped only in his thin cotton cloth on the bare snow. His eventual enlightenment was very high, extraordinary, born from such relentless effort and unwavering determination. There are many other remarkable stories in Buddhist traditions, for example, about the successive reincarnations of high lamas in Tibetan Buddhism, such as the Dalai Lamas. It is believed that before one such lama passes away, they often give indications or prophecies about where their next incarnation, their rebirth, can be found. Then search parties are sent out to find the child who is believed to be that reincarnation. Currently, the 14th Dalai Lama is a globally respected spiritual leader living in exile in India. However, the outward manifestations or claims of being living Buddhas by various figures in different traditions, if we compare them to the classical descriptions of arahants or highly realized bodhisattvas from the ancient scriptures, might not always seem to align perfectly in terms of specific powers or levels of attainment. It's not that they necessarily know everything or possess all the supernormal powers described for fully enlightened beings of the past. However, one thing that is very heartening and comforting to many around the world is that the current Dalai Lama, His Holiness Tenzin Gyatso, teaches the Buddha Dharma very beautifully, very genuinely, emphasizing universal compassion, ethics, and interreligious harmony, and he attracts and inspires many people from all walks of life. So, he is also someone who helps the core principles of the Dharma spread widely in a way that is relevant to the modern world. But alongside him, some of his compatriots in Tibetan Buddhism also focus on transmitting esoteric Vajrayana practices which involve many complex rituals, visualizations, and mantras. This is a diverse tradition with many facets, and it's not for us here to comment on or criticize specific practices of other schools. But the Dalai Lama himself is widely seen as a very genuine and compassionate spiritual leader. It is said that those who follow some schools of Tibetan Vajrayana, many advanced practitioners develop special abilities and meditative heat, tummo, because they train intensively in yogic practices from a young age. Some are said to be able to dry wet sheets with their body heat in freezing temperatures. Some, when they pass away, are said to not need to be washed or prepared in the usual way. They might sit in meditation, and their bodies self-cremate through an intense inner fire, sometimes leaving behind only hair, nails, and perhaps some pearl-like relics, a phenomenon sometimes referred to as the rainbow body or body of light. We also hear stories from the early Buddhist tradition, for instance, about Venerable Ananda, the Buddha's cousin and attendant. It is said in some accounts that when he was about to pass away, he also levitated into the air above the Rohini River, which formed the boundary between two kingdoms that were about to go to war over his relics. He then self-cremated his body with a blaze of fire, and his relics were said to have miraculously fallen onto both banks of the river, thus satisfying both kingdoms and preventing a war. Such are the very special and inspiring deaths of some great holy beings. Our Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha himself, he passed away gently and peacefully, lying on his right side between two sala trees. But he announced his impending parinibbana final passing 3 months beforehand and was very composed and self-possessed throughout. When he decided that in 3 months he would enter parinibbana, no one could sway him from that decision. He resolved to depart. This indicates the ability to choose when to die or not die according to one's own wish, a sign of great spiritual mastery. If he had wanted to live on for a longer period, even for an eon, he could have done so, as he himself stated. But the Buddha said that living on indefinitely in that particular physical form was not ultimately beneficial for the long-term propagation of the Dharma. It was better for him to pass away, so that later generations, still having his example and his preserved teachings, would strive earnestly to practice. So, 3 months after his announcement, he passed away. And the Buddha's passing, his parinibbana, was described as very beautiful, wonderfully peaceful, and profoundly significant. Let's talk a little about relics, sarira in Sanskrit. After those who are highly enlightened, or sometimes just very virtuous, pass away and their bodies are cremated, they often leave behind these relics. These are often described as small, pearl-like or crystal-like substances that remain from the bones after cremation. They are said to have transformed due to the intensity of the cremation fire and the purity of the person. This phenomenon usually results from a combination of two factors. First, the person's physical constitution, perhaps their bone structure, was good or unique. Second, and more importantly, that person lived a very virtuous life, full of ethical conduct and perhaps deep meditation. That's usually the basis. We shouldn't necessarily say that every person who leaves relics was definitely fully enlightened in the ultimate sense. Just as if someone dies and doesn't leave relics, we shouldn't conclude they were not enlightened or not virtuous. If relics are found, it generally means the person's bones were of a certain quality and, more significantly, they lived a good and pure life. Good bones, when burned intensely, might melt and recrystallize into these beautiful forms. Many people can have them. There's a famous story in the Zen tradition that illustrates this point. In a certain monastic assembly, there was a monk who was known to sit in meditation for very long periods, day after day. Everyone in the assembly assumed he must be enlightened because of his austere practice. The Zen master of that monastery, who was himself truly enlightened, decided to test this monk. He went and asked him a pointed question about the Dharma. The monk didn't answer or couldn't answer satisfactorily. He then simply went into his room and passed away while still sitting in meditation. When his body was cremated, it produced a number of beautiful relics. The rest of the assembly was very surprised and confused, saying, when the master asked him a question, he couldn't answer. But when he died and was cremated, he had so many relics. What does this mean? They didn't know what to make of it. Then the Zen master went before the altar where the relics were placed and said something to this effect. Even if you produced a whole bucketful of these shiny relics, it's not as good as if, when I asked you that question, you had been able to answer one sentence properly, showing true understanding. Answering one question correctly from a state of genuine insight would have been a better proof of his enlightenment than a large quantity of relics. So, does having relics guarantee full enlightenment? Not necessarily. Remember that. It often just indicates a good and virtuous life, and perhaps good physical constitution. Don't use that as the sole criterion for assessing someone's spiritual attainment. However, it is also true that most truly holy beings, when cremated, do leave relics, often many. And these are revered by their followers. Let's briefly compare the ultimate goals of our Buddhism with those of some other religions or philosophical systems. For example, in classical Confucianism, the primary aim of striving and self-cultivation is to become a superior person, Junzi in Chinese, a person of profound virtue, wisdom, and propriety, who lives in harmony with society and fulfills their duties. That's the main goal. There's generally no explicit talk in early Confucianism of being reborn in a heavenly realm or becoming a divine saint in the way other religions might describe. Confucianism primarily speaks of perfecting oneself within the human realm and becoming a truly good and wise person. A person of impeccable virtue is considered achieving the highest human ideal. That's the focus. As for the major theistic religions, such as Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, the reward for a person who lives a righteous life according to God's commandments and knows how to practice their faith is often described as being reborn in heaven or paradise, to be with God or in God's presence after death. That is their ultimate goal, generally speaking, and that's the culmination. And up there, in those heavenly realms, there might still be various forms of worldly or superworldly pleasures. Some religious texts from various cultures even promise very specific and sometimes surprisingly sensual pleasures in their heavens with beautiful celestial maidens, abundant food and drink, and so on, perhaps even better than a worldly nightclub, as a reward for people here on earth who know how to practice their faith and please God. It can seem quite strange from a Buddhist perspective, which emphasizes detachment from sensual pleasures as part of the path to liberation. As for Taoism, particularly the path of the immortals, Xian in Chinese, their goal is, firstly, while living, to cultivate a strong and healthy body, to achieve longevity, and to live in peace and harmony with the Tao, the fundamental principle of the universe. And if they die or transform, they aspire to go to the realms of the immortals, which are often described as beautiful lands where beings live for vast periods in great bliss and freedom. Immortals are somewhat similar in concept to the celestial beings or devas in the heavenly realms of Buddhism. Today, we have spoken at length about the truth of cessation, Nirodha Sacca, the third noble truth. Next time we meet, we will speak about the truth of the path, Magga, the fourth noble truth, which is the way to realize this cessation. We have spent 2 sessions now on the truth of cessation, discussing the nature of Nibbana and the results that can be obtained through dedicated practice in Buddhism. We've talked about levels of attainment from the very foundational stages of developing a more peaceful and virtuous life, gradually up to the higher levels of meditative absorption and sainthood. Though the very highest levels of Nibbana are ultimately beyond our current full comprehension with words alone, so I've only touched upon them lightly, because if I speak too much about these very abstract and profound states, you might all fall asleep. So, as we conclude this talk for today, let us also sincerely wish for each other that everyone here may, through their practice, gradually attain the experience of cessation, the end of suffering. May our practice all bear good and beautiful results, whether small or great, in this very life. But the highest and best wish is that one day in some future lifetime, through diligent cultivation of the path, all of us here will attain perfect Buddhahood, full enlightenment, for the benefit of all sentient beings. May it be so. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.